Chapter 155. Looking at Li Hongyuan's departing back, he even looked somewhat leisurely, while the Gong Prince stood in place, desperately restraining his anger. His eyes were red as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. He looked exactly like an enraged beast. The enemy was clearly in front of him, but there was an invisible cage firmly binding him, unable to take a step forward. Until Li Hongyuan's figure disappeared, the Gong Prince was unable to return to his senses for a long time. At this moment, even Prince Kong and Prince Ray looked at their fourth brother and felt that he was a little pitiful. However, they had also suffered losses in the hands of that king of hell, so they couldn't sympathize with him. As for what happened to the female guests, they had to ask clearly. They didn't want their own family to make the same mistake. At that time, the one who would be unlucky would be themselves. The women of the inner compound cut his face as a man. He couldn't bicker with them. After all, no matter how much of a scoundrel he was, he still needed this kind of bearing, so only men like them could bear it. He was so righteous and confident if it was someone else they would be the same. But far from his level, they wouldn't be able to vent their anger like him standing in Li Hongyuan's position. Wasn't it very satisfying? And what happened here naturally reached the Gongqin princess consort's ears at the first moment. Her own prince was ruthlessly humiliated, 3 brothers were kicked until they vomited blood, her vision darkened and she almost fainted. And when she heard the reason, she wasn't stupid, she could still connect the dots. She looked at Jingwan again as if she was dipped in poison, but her lips trembled, unable to spit out half a word. Among the sisters-in-law, she lived the most unscrupulously, and the least needed to play tricks. In this aspect she was naturally weaker, but that didn't mean she was like Luo Jingying without any self-awareness. If she blurted out something bad, perhaps that king of hell would put the debt on her husband and her family. The consequences were absolutely not something she could bear. The so-called disaster from the mouth was probably like this. Jingwan was baffled by the Gongqin princess consort's gaze. What kind of life and death enmity was there? Mu Gonggong walked over to Jing. "Third miss?" Unconsciously there was a bit of flattery. Jingwan slightly retreated a step. The people around Jin Qinhuang seemed to be a bit scary. "Greetings to eunuch. What instructions does eunuch have?" And it was better not to offend her future husband's steward. Seeing Jingwan salute him, eunuch Mu hurriedly avoided her. Even if he had 9 lives and 9 guts, he didn't dare to accept it. But at the same time she also realized that she had gone overboard. It was true that third Miss Luo was Master's most cherished person, but she herself did not know all. If her actions were too obvious, not only would she fail to please Master, but she would also be frightened. When she returned she could probably prepare to die. Thus she hurriedly straightened her face. "Third young lady, this servant doesn't deserve this. Master asked this servant to inform Miss that Miss can return with your family." Since she was not happy to stay here, she naturally did not need to stay any longer. So to say, Gong Qinhuang's face change in expression should be related to Jin Wangwang. Since he had already asked her to go back, she was more than happy to do so. Anyway, if she hadn't been stopped, she would have already left. So she nodded and then she saluted everyone high and mighty. There was no need to call her family. Just now, when Jingwan was preparing to leave, they had already stood up. Jingwan looked at old Madame Luo and nodded her head without leaving a trace. Then, under the watchful eyes of everyone, the Luo family, led by old Madame Luo, slowly walked away. And the servants of the Gong Wangfu, without Master's permission, naturally didn't dare to stop them. The old madam of each family, the mistresses of the family, and even the noblewomen, all looked at each other in dismay. If it was said that Jingwan left, then it could be said that she was young and impetuous and couldn't bear being wronged, so she had a small temper. However, old Madame Luo didn't even say a word. Her granddaughter said to leave and she just led the way. Wasn't the right thing to do to teach her own child, mediate, and everyone would have a way out? Then everyone would still be amiable? Even if Luo Peishan was an important official in the court, it was very unwise for the Luo family to offend a Wangye who held real power. Old Madame Luo wasn't such a short-sighted person. There were rumors that she loved the Luo third young lady very much. Looking at her attitude, it really wasn't fake at all. She couldn't tolerate the slightest grievance, to the point where she had no principles and didn't care about the Luo family. Everyone was smart. Seeing the attitude of the Gong Wangfei and the appearance of the Qin Wangfu's personal attendant, they immediately sent people to inquire about it. Then they quickly got the news. After all, with such a big commotion, it was impossible to hide it even if they wanted to. With the king of hell taking action, everyone shut their mouths. This lord no one could afford to offend. Master Liaochen said that Jin Wangfu and the Luo third young lady are a match made in heaven. The imperial concubine Yang Yang in the palace has already said that Jin Wangfu didn't bring bad luck to his wife, it's just that the marriage hasn't come yet. His Majesty also attaches great importance to it. Jin Wangfu's protection of the Luo third young lady, whether it's because there won't be another one if he misses this one, or because he really lost face. In short, the Luo third young lady who is connected to Jin Wangfu's fate cannot be provoked. A noblewoman said lightly. When the people around heard this, they nodded in deep agreement. The third miss of the Luo family looked gentle and kind, but if someone really provoked her, she would be a tough nut to crack. With her protective grandparents' great elder princess's support, and the king of hell, whoever provoked her would be unlucky. It was fine if it was her own fault, but if her family was implicated, she would be a great sinner. Didn't they see the wife of the left governor crying to see her son just now? He was kicked to the point of vomiting blood. Something went wrong, it might leave a lifelong illness. When Jin Wangfu left, he seemed to have said that the left governor should go to him and ask for forgiveness. Kiske, who knew what would happen. Looking at the Gong Qin Wangfei again, her birthday was like this. However, there were still a few people who pitied her, and more people were rejoicing in her misfortune. The main reason was that she was usually too flamboyant. Other people's husbands took in concubines, but she showed off how much her own Wang Ye's husband cared about her. Other people's concubines stirred up trouble, but Sheik lamented that the Gong Qin Wangfu was too quiet. When everyone was the same, their hearts would be balanced. When other people's feet hurt, you still ruthlessly stepped on them. How could you not be hated? Therefore today you were ruthlessly taught a lesson and lost a lot of face. You deserved it. That was why it was said that people should be low-key. Even if they were living a good life, they should just be happy. Not everyone could be like Jin Wangfu, who casually drew hatred and didn't worry about being retaliated against. However, it might not be the right time to retaliate against Jin Wangfu. Therefore, thinking about it this way, perhaps Jin Wangfu was just enjoying himself in time. On the way out, because there was no master's order, the servants also didn't prepare a soft sedan. The group of people left on foot. Jingwan and the others also heard Li Hongyuan's actions. Even Sun Yijia, who had an extremely bad impression of Li Hongyuan, was silent. No matter what his purpose was, it was very satisfying. From now on, whoever dared to find trouble with Wan Mimi would have to think twice. On the contrary, Jingwan appeared to be very silent. Jin Wangfu's actions had repeatedly exceeded her expectations. Instead, it was old Madame Luo who patted Jingwan's hand. Silly girl, don't think so much. The so-called one's glory is bound together. One's loss is also bound together. You and Jin Wangfu are engaged. Gong Qin Wangfei humiliating you is no different from humiliating him. This was Jin Wangfu's own words, and it was basically what everyone agreed on. At this time, when old Madame Luo emphasized it again, Jingwan instead felt that there was a deeper meaning. Don't think too much, but this person, had a bit of a rebellious heart and would subconsciously think too much. If Jin Wangfu wasn't because of this reason, then it could only be because of her? Alright, she really shouldn't think too much. Thus, Jingwan didn't hesitate to throw this question to the side. Old Madame Luo was actually very satisfied with Li Hongyuan's actions. When she found out that Jin Wangfu really didn't have a terrible reputation and no power on the surface, she immediately nodded and agreed. The most important thing was that he could protect Wan. In fact, he did this impeccably. If it was other people such as Qin Jingmin and Sun Yilin, when they encountered today's matter, they could only remain silent. No matter how angry they were, they could only watch as Wan was bullied. At most, they would swear in their hearts that they would do this and that in the future. But most people would only look at the present. Even if they retaliated in the future, the current grievances were real. She even hoped that Wan wouldn't be wronged in the slightest. When they left the Gong Wangfu, everyone boarded the carriage. Then not long after, they were intercepted halfway. Daring to do this kind of thing so openly, other than a certain person, no one else could think of it. Fortunately, the only people who came with old Madame Luo were Jingwan and Sun Yijia. As for the others, even Wangshi didn't come. When Li Hongyuan found Luo Peishan and said those words, Luo Peishan basically repeated them word for word to his old wife. To let Wanwan be alone with him, to want her granddaughter to be pure and innocent and not be taken advantage of, that was absolutely impossible. But could you stop him? If you really were stopped, you probably wouldn't be a living king of hell. So, this grandson-in-law, if you were satisfied with something, you would be very satisfied. If you were dissatisfied with something, you would want to chop him up. Old Madame Luo finally sighed and could only nod in agreement. She only hoped that Jin Wangfu wouldn't be too excessive. Li Hongyuan only had Gong Mama stay behind to serve, and everyone else was sent away. Sun Yijia watched as Jingwan boarded Jin Wangfu's carriage. It didn't have the symbol of the Wangfu and it wasn't eye-catching. Thinking of his bad reputation, she was worried that Jingwan would suffer. Even if the two were engaged, as long as they weren't married, they would still be a single man and woman together. People knew it would also be bad. If he cared even a little bit, he shouldn't have done this kind of thing. Sure enough, it's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. She endured and endured, but in the end Sun Yijia also jumped off the carriage. Yijia, come to grandmother's carriage. Before she could take 2 steps, Sun Yijia was stopped by old Madame Luo. Looking at old Madame Luo, who was lifting the curtain, and then at Jin Wangfu's carriage, she hesitated, but still gave up and didn't chase. Old Madame loved Wan Mimi dearly, and was so calm and collected, there shouldn't be any problems, right? She turned and boarded old Madame Luo's carriage. Grandmother. Old Madame Luo pulled her to sit beside her, and the carriage slowly moved forward. A moment later, old Madame Luo opened her mouth. Jin Wangfu treats Wanwan differently, you don't have to worry. Sun Yijia stared blankly. She didn't understand what this meant, but seeing that old Madame Luo didn't have any intention to talk more, she could only suppress her doubts. I understand, grandmother. You're also a good child. In terms of status, marrying Jinghua is a grievance for you. It's nothing, grandmother. I don't feel wronged, really, I don't feel wronged at all. Sun Yijia paused. To tell you the truth, in the Luo family I feel much happier than in Dinghua Fu. Being able to marry Jinghua is my life's greatest fortune. A fortune cultivated from 8 lifetimes. It's also Jinghua's fortune to be able to marry you. Don't think too much about your maternal family's matters, just live a good life with Jinghua. As for grandmother, I don't ask Wanwan to have great glory, splendor, wealth and rank, I only wish for her to be well. I also have the same expectations for you too. It's just that the heavens seem to want to shower her with riches and honor, but it's hard to predict whether it will be smooth sailing. She hopes that you too will be well, so you must be well. Sun Yijia's eyes reddened. How could she not know what old Madame Luo meant? One person for a lifetime, she also knew and even supported it. Grandmother. Alright, stop crying, let's not talk about this. If you don't mind that grandmother is an old woman, you can chat with grandmother. You can talk about anything. Perhaps it was because of Jingwan, but she was more patient with people who were close to Jingwan. And on the other side, Jingwan sat at the side of the carriage with her head slightly lowered, while Li Hongyuan half leaned on the middle seat. Ever since Jingwan got on the carriage, his line of sight never left her. If Jingwan knew that he had previously smashed the wine jug and splashed his clothes and shoes, she would know at this moment that he had completely changed into a new set of clothes. This carriage didn't look conspicuous from the outside, but it was actually very big. The decorations inside were also very luxurious. Compared to the carriage that Jingwan had stayed in for a short period of time, this carriage was even better. Every little detail revealed that Jin Qinhuang was rich and super rich, but it wasn't the least bit uncouth. It was extremely tasteful and matched his status. Moreover, Jin Qinhuang was clearly a hedonist. Luxury, tastefulness and comfort. When these 3 things were put together, it was even more difficult to satisfy. But for this person it seemed like it was just a piece of cake. Come here. Li Hongyuan's slightly low voice sounded. It was relatively soft, almost enough for Jingwan to hear without scaring her because of the sudden sound. Jingwan raised her head. Li Hongyuan pointed at the seat in front of her, the meaning was self-evident. Jingwan hesitated for a moment but still got up and sat over there. First, she couldn't refuse. Even if she was tough, she still had to choose a partner. Obviously it was useless for Li Hongyuan. Also, Jingwan wasn't a native of the ancient times. The concept of keeping a distance between men and women wasn't that heavy. The other party was her own fiancé and there was no one around, so it didn't matter if he got closer. Although subconsciously she rejected romantic stallion men, but she didn't have any expectations for the other party, let alone hope for love. Sooner or later she would reach this step, so she wouldn't be very resistant. Li Hongyuan very naturally put his hand on Jingwan's waist. With a little force he pulled her in to prevent her from losing her balance. At the same time he also brought her closer to his body. Jingwan subconsciously reached out to block his chest. However, even if she was much stronger than the average girl, she was still far from Li Hongyuan. His other hand held Jingwan's white and slender fingers and gently rubbed them. Jingwan only held hands with her boyfriend in her previous life, but compared to this, the difference was like heaven and earth. Moreover, this handsome man was looking at her tenderly and affectionately, as if she was his whole world. The touch of his fingertips caused an electric current to surge through her body, making her feel numb, and her body couldn't help but tremble. "Your Highness, Li Hongyuan responded softly. His voice was low and seductive. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her fingertips. Once, twice, 3 times, he took turns kissing her, not letting go of any of her fingers. Jingwan only felt that Li Hongyuan's lips were slightly cold. Like she said, he was the kind of handsome man who had no flaws. The shape of his lips was naturally exceptionally beautiful. Even Jingwan had the urge to go up and have a taste. Although it wasn't that she hadn't kissed him before, but at that time she was forced to kiss him while she was unconscious. She was scared to death, so who would have the mood to experience what it was like? Thinking of this, Jingwan unconsciously swallowed her saliva. When Jingwan realized what she had done, her face flushed red. She lowered her head and wished that she could be an ostrich for once. Jingwan would never admit that she was a pervert. It was all this bastard's fault. Jingwan's series of reactions naturally fell into Li Hongyuan's eyes. He curled his lips and laughed softly. Li Hongyuan let go of her hand and pinched her chin. He used a bit of force to force her to raise her head. Then his hand moved along her neck and clasped the back of her neck. At the same time he used his hand on her waist to press their bodies together. Li Hongyuan lowered his head slightly. Their lips were extremely close to each other. "Let you have a taste?" Li Hongyuan coaxed. His breath caressed her face. In this aspect, a certain king of hell was definitely at the elite level. Jingwan was probably even worse than a rookie. The difference between their levels was too great. She couldn't control herself and was about to die. A demon had appeared. Who would be kind enough to take him away? Seeing that they were getting closer and closer and were about to touch each other, Jingwan's head suddenly tilted back and her body began to struggle. However, her struggle was futile, and Li Hongyuan's eyes were getting darker and darker. "Wanwan, don't move. I'm going to get angry." It was more threatening than threatening. Jingwan was a little frightened by his eyes. He was temperamental. That's right. Li Hongyuan didn't insist on kissing her and leaned back. However, his hands weren't content. The touch on her waist and neck was gentle but couldn't be ignored. Jingwan felt goosebumps all over her body. Her waist and legs were weak. Jingwan really couldn't take it anymore. "Your Highness, It was still that bewitching tone. "Can you let go of this subject's body?" Jingwan said with a slightly trembling voice. Okay, Jingwan wasn't happy. Not only because his hands didn't stop moving but also because the more agreeable he was, the more likely it was a turning point. But, as expected, Li Hongyuan's tongue swept across her lips. "Kiss me and I'll let you go." Jingwan was originally trembling because of his seductive actions. However, after hearing his words, her face couldn't help but darken. "You're a dignified prince. Do you have to be so shameless? Bad girl, you clearly wanted to kiss me just now. Now it seems like you're forcing yourself. I've already told you that I won't force people." Jingwan wanted to swear. Isn't this forcing others? Seeing Jingwan's glare and sullen appearance, Li Hongyuan was in a good mood. "You really don't want to kiss me? But I want to kiss Wanwan. I was thinking that if you took the initiative I would just kiss you. If it was me." Jingwan suddenly leaned forward and pecked him on the lips before moving away. "Your Highness, please let go." Jingwan's movements were too fast and too sudden. Li Hongyuan didn't have time to do anything even if he wanted to. He couldn't help but laugh. "What a silly girl. Have you tasted it yet? This kind of thing should be experienced properly." Then he told her how to experience it with his own hands. At first it was just a kiss on the lips. Not long after, a certain someone was no longer satisfied with such contact. With a domineering force that couldn't be refused, he opened her teeth. It wasn't that he didn't kiss her deeply. It was just that when she was awake, that kind of refusal seemed even more wonderful. His lips swept across her pearly white teeth, swept across her palate and entangled with her tongue to dance with him. He didn't know when, but Jingwan's action of pushing him out completely turned into an act of obedience. Not only her hands but also her tongue. When a certain hand crept up to her chest, Jingwan's muddled consciousness seemed to finally realize that something was wrong. She suddenly woke up and retreated. She pressed Li Hongyuan's hand down and glared at him angrily. Li Hongyuan licked his lips as if he hadn't had enough. He looked at Jingwan and curled the corners of his mouth. There was an inexplicable sense of wickedness and mockery in his voice. Wan, do you think that I don't have enough strength? So you want to press harder? Jingwan was a little confused at first. Only when the hand squeezed her chest did she react. Bastard. At the same time she slapped his hand hard. From the sound of her voice, it was clear that she didn't show any mercy. This time, it was Li Hongyuan's turn to be startled. In his previous life he seemed to have only been beaten by his father. This kind of method, this kind of person was really fresh. Li Hongyuan looked at the back of his hand that was a little red. Should this prince be glad that Wan didn't slap my face, Jingwan pursed her lips. She was also angry out of humiliation, so she subconsciously slapped him. One must know that there were only a few people who dared to hit this prince. And the ones who really did it were probably Emperor Lu Qing and noble Consort Su. If an ordinary person dared to hit him, it would definitely be a serious crime. However, he had already hit her. Li Hongyuan pinched her chin. After hitting this prince, shouldn't you immediately ask for forgiveness? If it's you, you're the one who's wronged first. This subject's daughter is rude. Your Highness, please forgive her. Li Hongyuan was a little surprised. I thought that you would resist to the death and not admit defeat. Last time in the palace when I wanted to flog you, you didn't even frown. How can it be the same? It's not my fault. So Wan now feels that she was wrong? It's not enough to admit that she was wrong. She still has to change. This person had already been slapped. How could she change? Moreover, she didn't think that this matter was her fault. But forget it. She couldn't get through to these people who were under the imperial power. There was no need to resist to the death. She looked at Li Hongyuan with vigilance. What does your Highness want? Li Hongyuan first tapped his lips. Wan, you can either compensate me or let me hit you back. Jingwan looked at him, then closed her eyes. Your Highness, you can hit me back. Seeing that Jingwan seemed to be facing death with equanimity, Li Hongyuan's hand on her waist slid down to her buttocks. Then he leaned close to her ear. If you want to hit me, you should hit me here. Moreover, you should take off my pants and hit me. Jingwan immediately opened her eyes and grabbed his collar. How could he be so shameless? Even if he had a bad record, she didn't have a bad impression of him from the few times she had met him. She thought that he was actually very cultured and didn't lack gentlemanly manners. Why was there such a big difference? You were just a subject before. Now you're my fiancé. Of course it's different. It turned out that Jingwan had voiced out her thoughts in a fit of rage. Your Highness also knows that I'm your fiancé? How many people haven't seen each other before getting married? As for herself, she had already been taken advantage of. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows. Wan wants to consummate her marriage with her husband the first time she meets him? I thought that you would prefer this. There's a process of getting familiar with each other. When the time comes, it'll be natural. Of course, it was better to get familiar with each other first. However, that was to improve their understanding of each other's temperament, not their bodies. Li Hongyuan pinched her face. You're the one who needs to apologize to this prince. It's your choice to choose one out of the two. Alright, I'll give you a chance to choose again. There's no third choice. Li Hongyuan shook his head. She had already taken off her pants and buttocks. The level of embarrassment was off the charts. In any case, they had already kissed, so one more kiss wouldn't matter, right? This time she closed her eyes and blushed. Wan is such a smart girl. How could you make mistakes again and again today? You're the one who should apologize to this prince. He had already kissed her, yet he still wanted her to take the initiative. How shameless. Fine. Jingwan grabbed his clothes again. She pulled hard and bit down. It was a real bite. Li Hongyuan didn't just feel the sting on his lips, he also tasted blood. This small injury was naturally harmless. On the contrary, Li Hongyuan felt that it was quite exciting and enjoyable. This little wolf cub like Wan reminded him of her ruthlessness when she killed people in his previous life. It made him want to strip her clean right now and eat her whole. However, Li Hongyuan restrained himself and didn't move. Other than cooperating with her a little, he completely let her do as she pleased. Jingwan felt that he wanted her to take the initiative to apologize to him. His lips moved away slightly. Continue. This apology has to be sincere. At the very least, it has to satisfy this prince. For this kind of thing, whether he was satisfied or not was up to him. Who knew if he was satisfied or not? Jingwan wanted to bite this shameless person to death. Chapter 156. Li Hongyuan could clearly feel the change in Jingwan's mood. To be honest, he felt that it was a little strange. He didn't have many women in his previous life, but they weren't few either. They weren't much different from those maidservants who served him. Naturally, he couldn't expect to understand the temperament and preferences of those women. At that time, those women were his vassals, so naturally they should follow his every whim. Later on, he met Wan Wan and interacted with her for a period of time under special circumstances. He had some understanding of her, but that was after experiencing setbacks and tribulations. Perhaps her nature hadn't changed, but her temperament had definitely changed. She was definitely different from the Wan Wan who still had the worries of a young girl. Although he started to understand her daily life a few years ago, that kind of understanding was only on the surface and couldn't touch her heart. If he wanted to understand her completely, he still had a long way to go. Li Hongyuan sighed in his heart. He was looking for trouble. However, there was no other way. Who asked him to want such a precious treasure? Not only her body but more importantly her heart. If he didn't want her to be like other women, he could only try to understand her. Then no matter how big the punishment was, he still had to endure it. Li Hongyuan leaned back and stepped on the couch with one foot. He lifted Jingwan up to sit on his other leg and let her lie on his body. Her head was pressed against the side of his neck. He used his chin to gently rub her forehead and stroked her back with pure comfort. Then he quietly hugged her and didn't do anything else. Jingwan was a little confused by him. Just a moment ago he was full of lust and flirting with her in various ways. How did he become a warm man in the blink of an eye? This was completely wrong. Jingwan wanted to see what kind of expression he had at this moment. What, Wan Wan still wants to apologize to this prince? Li Hongyuan didn't stop her and just chuckled before she got up. Jingwan paused for a moment and obediently lay back down on the bed. This time, Li Hongyuan's voice lasted a little longer. His chest vibrated along with the sound of his heartbeat. Jingwan subconsciously clenched her fist and punched him. Then she realized that she had made a mistake again. This slightly coquettish punch was like an itch to Li Hongyuan, and it was especially aimed at his heart. Although he was a little restless, he restrained himself and reached out to hold her hand. You have a bad temper. Jingwan didn't say anything and didn't pull her hand back. After the initial confusion, after she threw a little tantrum, her heart was now very shocked. Because of Li Hongyuan's attitude, he was taking her emotions into consideration and even indulging her. No matter how she thought about it, it wasn't right. Then Jingwan unexpectedly thought of another characteristic of Li Hongyuan's 7 days of intense affection. She didn't know much about this point. She only knew a little from Sunny Jia's extremely dissatisfied nagging towards Jin Qinhuang. He would give extreme affection to the beauties he fancied. As for the specifics, Sunny Jia didn't know. Then, did Jingwan have reason to suspect that everything he did to her today, whether it was the previous teasing or the current care, were all part of his intense affection? If every time this happened he could restrain all of his bad temper and really hold a woman in the palm of his hand, with a perfect skin and a tenderness that could drown people, it wouldn't be a difficult thing to fall for him. No wonder she heard that every few days many women would be infatuated with him and go crazy for him. However, once those few days passed, the gentle lover could transform into the cold king of hell. Don't expect to get even the slightest bit of pity from him. Jingwan wasn't sure if she had stepped into this kind of situation. She didn't know if after 7 days she would be ruthlessly abandoned by him. Of course, her identity was different and it was impossible for her to stay by his side for 7 days. However, it seemed that the so-called 7 days of intense affection, 7 days was only the longest time limit. No one exceeded 7 days, and the number of people who reached 7 days could be counted on one's fingers. It seemed that after 1 day he would completely lose interest. Jingwan thought that she had found the crux of the problem and relaxed instead. She even thought optimistically that since she was able to be doted on by Jin Qinhuang, It meant that her appearance should be a little more beautiful than she thought. Or perhaps, it was just her identity that gave her extra points. Perhaps after today he would no longer pay attention to her. In any case, from the beginning she only wanted a status. Because of Master Liao Chen's approval, as long as there were no uncontrollable accidents, she didn't need to think about breaking off the engagement. Thinking about Jin Qinhuang's former fiancés, this kind of uncontrollable accident was something that Jing Wan would absolutely not allow. Seeing that she was his wife, at most he should throw her in the inner courtyard of the Wangfu, and not another courtyard where he kept beauties. After all, that would also damage his face, right? Jing Wan refused to think about more details at this time. Since Jin Qinhuang was so interested in playing, then she would enjoy it. She wanted to see to what extent his so-called intense affection could pamper her. Li Hongyuan clearly felt that Jingwan's body had softened, unlike before when she was more or less tense. He didn't think that his pacification was the main reason for this. As for what it was, he couldn't think of it for a while. However, no matter what the reason was for Jingwan to be able to lean on him like this, it was a scene that he had longed for too long. It was a rare enjoyment. If Li Hongyuan knew of Jingwan's thoughts, who knows what kind of expression he would have. However, Li Hongyuan was actually a person who wouldn't repent even in death. He would walk a path until it was dark. Even if he hit the southern wall, he would probably dig a hole and continue to walk. Perhaps in the future, when Jingwan led him around a corner, he would probably obediently follow. Therefore, Li Hongyuan felt that he and Jingwan would still have to grind after that. It was really the truth. Now the two people's brain circuits were on completely different frequencies. The carriage fell into silence, and the expressionless faces of the people outside finally eased a little. However, when they thought that someone had endured for so long and finally had a chance to take advantage of her openly, they were afraid that this kind of thing would not be rare. Therefore they could only feel depressed. Of course, the only one who was really depressed was Nanny Gong. The others were at most a little embarrassed after hearing the scene. In fact, since the King of Hell learned about this marriage from his father, he had been in a good mood recently. When he was in a good mood, it meant that the days of suffering of the people around him were reduced. According to their thoughts, it would be good if Luo could marry into the king's mansion immediately. When the carriage stopped, Jingwan got up with Li Hongyuan and also sat up. The place where she didn't sit was unchanged. He reached out and rearranged the slightly messy hair ornaments on Jingwan's head. However, because he was not familiar with it, he accidentally hooked Jingwan's hair. Before Jingwan did anything, he felt distressed. He simply took off all the hair ornaments on her head that were just for decoration rather than fixing her hair. I'll redo it later. Are you hungry? Let's go eat something. In fact, it was still early to eat. However, compared to the two of them staying in this enclosed space, it was better to go out. Therefore she nodded. According to Li Hongyuan's idea, he wanted to directly carry Jingwan off the carriage, but Jingwan firmly refused. Li Hongyuan did not argue with her and got off the carriage before Jingwan. Then when Jingwan came out, he naturally reached out to help her down. Jingwan paused for a moment before reaching out and placing her hand in his palm. Jingwan felt that it was somewhat inconceivable that the rumored temperamental, cold and ruthless Jin Qinhuang could lower himself to this extent when he was favoring her. Those women who were born and raised here and whose status was far inferior to hers, she was afraid that they would be overwhelmed by this favor and would be one step closer to falling into his hands. It was no wonder that Jingwan's thoughts couldn't be turned around. It was just that no matter how she looked at it, it didn't seem like it was the first time that he had done this kind of thing. According to common sense, for a person like him, after getting off the carriage, it would be good if he could just stand there and wait for you. Don't mention Jingwan. Even the people who served by Li Hongyuan's side were all unusually shocked. Because of the assassination at Bai Long Temple, Li Hongyuan's bodyguards who belonged to the other factions had all been removed. It looked like there might be people from other factions, but in fact they were all loyal to Li Hongyuan. Even if they were not as close as the group of people who were closest to Li Hongyuan, they more or less knew about his matters. They knew that there was a person at the top of their master's heart. After the marriage was confirmed, they also knew that that person was the current future Wang Fei. However, when they saw the scene with their own eyes, they were even more clear about the position of the future Wang Fei in their master's heart. After the Wang Fei married into the master's family, how should they treat her? They obediently lowered their heads and looked down. Daring to stare at the future Wang Fei, did they want their eyeballs to be dug out? After standing still, Jingwan looked around. Unexpectedly, she had already entered an elegant courtyard. There were winding streams, small bridges, pavilions, flowers and rockery. To some extent, it was very in line with Jingwan's preferences. When Nanny Gong's serious gaze landed on her head, Jingwan suddenly felt awkward. There was also an inexplicable shyness. She slightly lowered her head and felt a little helpless, as if she had been caught doing something bad by the head of the household. Li Hongyuan glanced at Nanny Gong, took Jingwan's hand, and stepped directly on the small bridge in front of them. Nanny Gong didn't feel anything about the living king of hell's eyes that couldn't wait to kill her completely. She just lamented for Jingwan in her heart. As soon as the status was confirmed, the living king of hell began to devour it blatantly. The girl was afraid that, passing through the garden, they went directly into the attic on the opposite side. This attic was different from other places. First of all, it was quite spacious. There were only a few main pillars supporting it and a guardrail at the edge. The other places were empty and there were curtains hanging above. After the two entered hand in hand, a few maids quietly put down the curtains. And the furnishings inside were all luxurious, elegant and stylish. However, Jingwan's eyes unexpectedly fell on the big bed with a cone-shaped sandman hanging on it. She looked back at the man beside her. Even if it was bottomless, Jingwan seemed to feel a cluster of flames. Chapter 157. Under his burning gaze, Jingwan subconsciously wanted to shake off his hand, but in the end there was no need to mention it. What did he mean by, compared to the two of us staying in this enclosed space, it's better to go out? It was obviously better to stay in the carriage where a certain someone only kissed and hugged, and didn't do anything out of line. But now it was obvious that he wanted to eat her up. Jingwan was really a little panicked at this time, and she wanted to turn around and run away immediately. Her hand was still held by him, and even if he didn't use much strength, Jingwan couldn't shake it off. In the end, she lowered her head, pursed her lips and kept silent, and didn't make any crazy movements to struggle desperately. This was the territory of the living king of hell. If he really wanted to do something to her, then even if she could shake him off, she would definitely not be able to get out of this courtyard. Moreover, the result of struggling was bound to be embarrassing. If he let her go out, then what awaited her was bound to be surrounded by people. Not only would her reputation be ruined, but the Luo family would also lose face. A person like him probably wouldn't allow anyone to disobey him, and if she really angered him, she was afraid that she would suffer worse treatment. Although Jingwan was flustered, she didn't lose her head. She very rationally weighed the pros and cons and then gradually calmed down. After calming down, she even had the leisure to think about other things. She should have thought about what might happen next, and it could also be considered as a part of the great favor. In the eyes of these powerful men, other means of favor were just supplementary. The real favor should be in bed. To be favored by them, that was the blessing of 8 lifetimes. At this moment, the little bit of affection Jingwan once had for Li Hongyuan shattered into pieces. At first she didn't shake him off, but then she didn't do anything else, and the slight trembling of her body disappeared in an instant. From these reactions he could roughly guess her thoughts. The fire in Li Hongyuan's eyes extinguished. She clearly knew the situation she might face, but she was still so calm and rational. Was this the reaction of a normal girl? If she was unwilling, she would want to escape regardless of the consequences. If she was willing, she should be shy and nervous. Li Hongyuan added another piece of strong evidence to his previous speculation. Li Hongyuan had never been a good person. Even if it was the person he loved the most, he wouldn't be soft-hearted when scheming. He admitted that he wanted Jingwan so much that he wanted to be close to her, and wanted to tie her to his side all the time. Therefore, even though he knew that his image in her heart would become more and more unbearable, he still wouldn't let her go as she wished. Other things could be discussed and could satisfy her, but there was absolutely no room for discussion. Li Hongyuan knew Jingwan's thoughts, but he wouldn't give any promises. He was notorious, the more sweet words he said, the more he would be seen as a flowery mouth, and it would only have the opposite effect. Therefore, towards Jingwan, at least before she fell in love with him, there were many words that couldn't be said. He could only use actions to tell her and use time to tell her. Li Hongyuan pulled Jingwan's hand and sat down at a low table, taking Jingwan to sit in his arms. If she didn't see wrongly, this should be a cushion used for kneeling. Sitting on the ground without any image or rules, Jin Qinwang, Where are your etiquette and upbringing? Jingwan then noticed that there were a lot of seasonal fruits on the table. There was a bright red watermelon cut to the size of a thumb, and the seeds were carefully picked out. A bright red skin that looked like a lychee that had just been picked. A large cherry that looked very attractive. There was also a yellow pineapple that had been peeled and cut. A black bayberry that was full of water. Sparkling and translucent crystal grapes. Most of the production areas weren't in the capital and, whether it was preservation or transportation, it was inconvenient. But these things all looked fresh, not damaged, and there wasn't the smell of fermentation. 2 servant maids brought over a basin of water and other things. They knelt on the ground in a well-behaved manner and raised the basin to a suitable height. Li Hongyuan personally took off the things on Jingwan's wrist and placed them on a tray at the side. Then he held Jingwan's hand and dipped it into the water. The temperature of the water was just right. Raising the water, he washed the 2 pairs of hands, one big and one small, and took a cloth towel to wipe the water off the hands. Until the servant maids left without making the slightest sound, Jingwan didn't take the initiative to move a finger. The servant maids were so indifferent that their eyelids didn't even move. Could be seen that they were used to it. In reality, the servant maids were very shocked. It was just that the living king of hell's tyrannical power was too strong. They shouldn't make any movements, say any words, or even make any expressions that they shouldn't make. Is there anything you like? Li Hongyuan held Jingwan's waist with one hand. He hesitated on the fruit platter for a moment, then picked up a cherry and sent it to Jingwan's mouth. Try it? Jingwan tilted her head to look at him. This wasn't her previous life, and transportation was very inconvenient. How much manpower, money, and material resources did he spend to achieve this step? Did His Majesty bestow this to Prince? Li Hongyuan's expression was gentle, and the corner of his mouth had a faint smile. There isn't any in the palace. If Imperial Father wasted money like this, the Imperial censor will nag him to death. Jingwan thought that he dared to casually use the word death on His Majesty. He really didn't care about taboo at all. The only person who can do such a wasteful thing is probably this prince. However, in any case, I still have to leave some face for other people. These were all privately brought back by this prince. Li Hongyuan casually pointed at cherries, lychees and the like. A lot of these were used up on the road. When we reached the capital, there wasn't much left. If you want to eat, there's more than enough. He once again sent the cherry to Jingwan's mouth. Try it. He said it as if he had specially brought it for her. Don't make her look like a demon concubine. However, whether it was true or not, she wasn't in a position to persuade him right now. Jingwan opened her mouth, but before she could take it, Li Hongyuan took advantage of the situation and stuffed it into her mouth. His fingertips lingered in her mouth for a moment, sweeping the tip of her tongue. When he saw Jingwan's eyes unconsciously widen, he very naturally took his hand out and slowly moved it to his lips. Then he stuck out his tongue and licked it, his eyes staring straight at her. Jingwan couldn't help but blush and abruptly turn her head away. Bastard, will you die if you don't tease people? Li Hongyuan's smile became even more obvious, as if he didn't notice Jingwan's embarrassment at all. Is it good? Jingwan felt that he wasn't asking about the cherry in her mouth, but his broken finger didn't have any taste at all. It wasn't good at all. Her mouth moved and her mouth was overflowing with the unique sweetness of cherries. It was a very pure taste and was quite good. Li Hongyuan suddenly leaned forward again and kissed Jingwan's lips. He parted her lips and teeth for a while before pulling away. At the same time, he took the cherry in Jingwan's mouth with him. He turned his head and spat it out onto the empty plate on the table. When Jingwan saw Li Hongyuan pick up another cherry, she directly covered her mouth with her handkerchief. I'm not eating anymore. Li Hongyuan seemed to be rather regretful. He directly threw the cherry into his mouth, then brought the plate over and placed it next to Jingwan's hand. His meaning was obvious. He wouldn't touch her mouth anymore. If she liked to eat, then she could eat without worry. Having something to do to distract her, even if it was just eating, seemed to be better than looking at him. As expected, Li Hongyuan did as he said. He just watched Jingwan eat the entire time. There weren't many cherries on the plate and Jingwan finished them one by one. She didn't know if it was because she saw Li Hongyuan spit out the cherry or because of some other reason, but Jingwan didn't eat as gently as she usually did. Try the others. Li Hongyuan took a lychee and peeled it. This was his eyeball, his heart and liver. He was afraid that she would melt in his mouth and fall in his hands. If he held her in his hands too tightly, he was afraid that she would stop breathing. If he held her too loosely, he was afraid that she would fly away. How could he bear to let her be humiliated? How could he let her have the slightest possibility of not being able to raise her head in the future? Perhaps it was really because he was too gentle at this moment. Jingwan believed his words and unconsciously relaxed. She even unconsciously curved her lips into a smile. Li Hongyuan's heart fiercely clenched. This silly girl, did she only ask for this little bit? Does Wang Ye like me? Jingwan said as if she was joking. Like very much. Li Hongyuan softly opened his mouth, but it was unprecedentedly serious. Jingwan inexplicably felt that what he said was true. He really liked her, at least at this moment he liked her. She couldn't escape, couldn't hide, she didn't want to make it look like a murder scene, and it seemed that there was no need to pretend to be a dead fish. Moreover, Jingwan felt that Jin Wang was such a master of the brothel. She hadn't done anything before, but she had already ruthlessly witnessed his high-level methods. When he really moved, she couldn't say how she would be aroused. This physiological reaction was not something that could be controlled by reason. Under the premise that she could keep her bottom line, why not experience the things that made countless men and women go crazy in any era and any background? In his eyes, she was completely reflected. Jingwan trembled as she kissed his lips. It was no longer fear, worry, or even despair, but only nervousness. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows with some surprise. In fact, Wan's understanding of this aspect was also not bad. Although it was less fun to teach her from scratch, it was also more interesting. It wasn't the first time that they kissed, but she was still so nervous. It could only be said that at this moment she was sincerely taking the initiative to kiss him. Her heart wanted to kiss him. This knowledge made Li Hongyuan's body and mind feel very happy. Gong Mama stood outside the door, watching the atmosphere between the two of them change little by little. She knew that Miss falling into the hands of this living king of hell in the end would definitely not have a good fruit to eat. But she could only look on helplessly as the former mistress carried the current mistress onto the bed. Spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, she closed the door tightly. Then she turned around and dutifully opened the door. It must be said that what Miss was doing now was actually the same in nature as fourth Miss before. However, she couldn't produce the slightest bit of malice towards her Mississippi. Even if she completely lost her virginity in the end, that was because she was abducted by that bastard. This was the relationship between closeness and estrangement. After about an hour, there was gradually no more movement inside. Gong Mama's hearing was extraordinary. She basically heard everything from beginning to end. From Mrs.'s reaction, Wang Ye really did what he said and didn't let Miss lose her virginity. At the same time, she was relieved. In fact, she admired him for being able to endure so much. Jingwan felt that the last of her strength was gone. Her whole body was soft and without any strength. She didn't want to move a single finger. She didn't manage to become like this in the end. When that day really came, what happened to lingering in the flower bushes, excessive drinking in women and weak body? Were they all eaten by dogs? Well, she only heard that Jin Wang Ye was fond of beauty. She didn't say that he was overly indulgent. Moreover, in the few times they met, there was no time when his complexion was not good. He actually knew how to control himself. It really wasn't easy. However, when they got married in the future, Jingwan would recall the word controlled that was given today. Her face would hurt for a long time. She felt that she was beaten into a pig's face every day. Wang Ye, can you loosen your grip a little? It was simply like being entangled by a python. Was it necessary to hug so tightly? Chapter 158. Your Highness, can you loosen your grip? It was as if she was being entangled by a giant python. Was it necessary to hug her so tightly? Li Hongyuan, who had his eyes closed, heard her words. Not only did he not loosen his grip, he turned over and pressed Jingwan under his body. Jingwan took a deep breath. The weight of a grown man, and a strong one at that. Was he trying to crush her to death without letting him eat his fill? Did he have to be so ruthless? Sensing Jingwan's deathbed struggle, Li Hongyuan finally moved his conscience away. He didn't care that his chin was still resting on Jingwan's shoulder. His face was close to hers and he whispered in her ear, "Jiao jiao jiao jiao." That's right, Li Hongyuan didn't call her Wan anymore. It was only because she had suddenly made such a request a moment ago. Who was Li Hongyuan? He immediately thought of the cause and effect. He already knew that Jingwan had misunderstood him and treated her as a substitute for another woman. Although he was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood, in a situation where he couldn't explain himself, this misunderstanding was actually the most reasonable explanation for his words and actions towards her. In fact, he could actually tell what Luo Peishan had said to Jingwan, that he cared about her. But he knew that she could accept the cruelest truth and didn't like it when others lied to her. Therefore, even if his lie would never be exposed, he didn't want to lie to her. Moreover, based on his own unusual experience, he inferred that Jingwan was also unusual. It was hard to guarantee that Jingwan wouldn't discover any clues in their future interactions. He didn't want to make her unhappy with a lie now. Midway, Jingwan's small request made Li Hongyuan quite happy. Even if Jingwan didn't say anything, he could guess what she was thinking. Although he wasn't happy to be used by his wife, it was the most gentle way to achieve his goal. However, other than this title, she didn't care about anything related to him. Perhaps she would even feel guilty towards him because she used him. After they got married, she would use him as a good wife to make it up to him. Her sudden request showed that she cared. At least at that moment, she didn't want to be someone else's substitute, even if she wasn't sure if he was thinking about her or Wanwan. This realization made Li Hongyuan happy, but at the same time he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As a result, he stopped calling her Wanwan. Instead, he gave her a nickname that didn't match her at all, but was the target of his hard work, Jiao Jiao. He raised her to be Jiao Jiao. After that, he became even more ruthless. Li Hongyuan closed his eyes and kissed her shoulder, which had changed color. "Do you like it?" Jingwan's face turned red. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and spoke without thinking. "Shut up." Li Hongyuan chuckled. "Jiao Jiao, what kind of nonsense are you thinking about? A good girl should be reserved." Was she thinking about something crazy? She wasn't reserved. She even dared to play the blame game. Jingwan gnashed her teeth in anger. This bastard, hooligan and pervert. Jingwan even suspected that she had returned to her real 14-15 years old self. Otherwise, how could she be so easily provoked by him? She really wanted to bite him alive. In any case, he was a prince. How could he be so shameless and shameless? At the very least, he should have some poise, right? It turned out that it was all eaten up by dogs. He knew that Jingwan was sulking, but he was very happy. Sure enough, compared to her calm and collected self, he preferred her lively and lively. Perhaps it wouldn't be as difficult to raise Wanwan into Jiao Jiao as he had expected. Another thing that made Li Hongyuan happy was that after this intimate contact, he was at least 70% sure that his obedient Jiao Jiao had never experienced the matters between a man and a woman. Although he had already said that no matter what her background or experience was, he would accept it all without reservation, but when he thought that she would only belong to him, he couldn't help but feel particularly happy. In reality, Li Hongyuan's possessiveness had been very strong since he was young. It was just that in his previous life he restrained himself and didn't show it so obviously. Later on, when he became the emperor, the world was his, and there wasn't anything that he particularly wanted to possess. After his rebirth, it was different. In addition, when he was the emperor, he was used to being overbearing and willful, so he didn't restrain himself at all. As a result, some of his actions towards Jingwan were attributed to his possessiveness by his old man. Li Hongyuan touched Jingwan's hair that had already been separated. It was soft and smooth, and the hair was still black and shiny all the way to the tip. There were no forks, so it could be seen that it had been carefully maintained. "Are you hungry? How about I have someone prepare the meal?" Jingwan was half pressed down by him. Even if she wanted to look at him, she couldn't do it. Her heart was somewhat complicated. In fact, she was now doubting the so-called great favor. Thinking back on the past 2 hours, excluding those parts where he specifically teased people, his actions, even if it was in her previous life, she basically couldn't find a man who would do it to this extent. What's more, in a feudal society where men were superior and women were inferior, if they didn't rely on men, it would be extremely difficult for a woman to survive. Under this kind of background, the other party was a dignified Qinhuang, the emperor's favored son. Male chauvinism and self-centeredness, this was normal. Their so-called favor should be more material. In other aspects, it was mostly indulgence and a bit of gentleness. But if the beauties that Jin Qinhuang kept, it was said that they all came from very humble backgrounds. The best were probably those girls from the down-and-out official's family. The proportion of these people was very small. Most of them came from brothels, dance halls, opera troupes, and there were also some commoner women. Upbringing and environment determined one's self-cultivation, bearing, and even taste. Jin Qinhuang, who was born in the imperial family, received the best upbringing. The palace maids that he came in contact with, their appearance and words were all first class. Even if he left the palace and opened a residence, his taste had changed. But could these women make him change his self-title from Ben Wang to I? Could they let him take care of them everywhere, putting the other party first in everything? Some of the things that were served by the maidservants, he would personally take care of them? If it was just a woman that he loved to the bones, there might be some possibility. But those favored didn't last more than 7 days, and he would throw them away after playing with them. He dared to talk back to the emperor, brazenly punish his brothers, ignore the forbidden laws, and attack the court officials. Would such a person lower himself for those women? Was it possible? She who gave him the title of Sheng Dot had a problem with her brain. In the end, it was still because of the Wan that he spoke of. Jingwan was really curious. What kind of woman was the other party to be able to make Jin Qinhuang, this kind of deep affection, so deep that she was just a substitute, yet he could hold her in the palm of his hand? But such an important person, why didn't third sister-in-law mention a single word? It couldn't be that she was hidden so tightly that the people outside didn't even hear a bit of the news, right? But was Jin Qinhuang the kind of person who would hide things? So, no matter what kind of situation it was, there seemed to be something that didn't make sense. Since she couldn't figure it out, she decided not to think about it anymore. Her stomach was hungry now. Moreover, this exercise, in addition to the fact that it was already summer, not to mention that it was countless times more tiring than her usual exercise, the degree of stickiness also multiplied. It was unbearable. Freshen up first. Li Hongyuan rubbed Jingwan's face, sat up and pulled Jingwan up. He pulled the thin quilt over and wrapped her tightly. Someone come. Gong Momo pushed the door and entered respectfully and properly. Does Wangye and Miss want water? She understood Jingwan's habits very well. Li Hongyuan faintly answered. Gong Momo withdrew. Jingwan watched Gong Momo leave for a short period of time and didn't raise her head. But even so, Jingwan still couldn't help but shrink into the quilt, leaving only the parts above her eyes exposed. Jingwan continued to think about the problem just now. Chapter 159. Such a carefree laugh in Jingwan's eyes was an ear-piercing mockery. This time not only did her face turn red, her entire body seemed to be boiling hot. Jingwan held back her restless claws. She warned herself that the other party was a prince and had a noble status, so she couldn't hit him. But this bastard was really too much. His arrogant laughter continued for a long time. Jingwan turned around to face him. Her legs were apart as she knelt on either side of Li Hongyuan's thighs. Her hands were on his shoulders. Compared to before, her posture was naturally a bit taller. The part that was previously submerged in the water was exposed to the air. Li Hongyuan was dazzled. His laughter naturally disappeared, but the corners of his mouth were still hooked. His hands didn't move. He even calmly leaned back and spread his arms on the edge of the tub. His posture was welcoming her, teasing and tasting as she pleased. Under his deep and teasing gaze, Jingwan was still terrified. For this kind of thick-skinned and hungry wolf who hadn't eaten his fill, teasing him was the same as sending herself to his door to take advantage of her. She withdrew her hands and stepped back. Her body sank into the water and the water directly reached her chin. Li Hongyuan was originally waiting for Jingwan to settle accounts with him. Sure enough, she was shy. Being stripped of his clothes by her was already something that could only be encountered by chance. Li Hongyuan was quite regretful. However, his Jiao Jiao would obediently throw herself into his arms one day. There was no rush. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future. He reached out and pulled her over. He felt Jingwan's resistance. I won't tease you. Let me hug you. In the end, his wife was still a bit young. Even if she hadn't lost her virginity, he didn't dare to go too far. It would harm her body. And if he was provoked again, he would be the only one to suffer. Jingwan looked at him very suspiciously, but in the end she didn't argue with him. If she didn't comply with him when he made a move, she would be the one to suffer. She followed his strength and snuggled into his arms. Her back leaned against his chest and her head leaned back on his shoulder. She relaxed her body that still hadn't fully recovered. Li Hongyuan splashed some water on Jingwan's shoulder. I was wondering if Jiao Jiao was going to use the same method to shut me up again. He sighed regretfully. Sealing it with a kiss, you wish. Jingwan thought that he couldn't see it and rolled her eyes. You dare to roll your eyes at me? Jiao Jiao's courage is indeed not small. Having been caught, Jingwan felt uncomfortable and speechless at the same time. Why do you keep staring at her? I think His Highness was mistaken. Alright, whatever Jiao Jiao says. However, didn't I tell you to call me Yun? Why are you calling me Prince now? Jingwan smiled. How can this subject call your highness by his name? She could call him anything she wanted in bed. That was just for fun. If she still called him that after they were done, it would be disgraceful. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows, but didn't continue to pursue the matter. When this girl was stubborn, even 9 oxen couldn't pull her back. Your Highness, miss. Mama Gong's voice sounded from outside the screen. What's the matter? Li Hongyuan asked indifferently. Replying to your highness, Mrs. Meals are always punctual. She must be hungry now. This servant has prepared some snacks for miss to fill her stomach first. Please allow it, your highness. As usual, Mama Gong spoke neither hurriedly nor slowly. Li Hongyuan rubbed Jingwan's stomach. It was this prince who didn't think it through. He kissed Jingwan's forehead. Jiao Jiao, eat first. Then let your mama help you bathe. When she's done, we'll eat together. When he finished speaking, he moved Jingwan a little further away and stepped out of the bathtub. He casually grabbed a robe from the side and put it on. Then he tied the robe around his waist. His movements were casual and unhurried. Disregarding everything else, just looking at him right now, this man had a fatal attraction. Li Hongyuan tossed his hair behind his back. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Jingwan leaning against the edge of the bathtub and looking at him. Her small eyes were filled with pure praise and appreciation. All right, it's not bad that this body can attract Wanwan's attention. He stepped forward and tapped the tip of her nose. What, have you been charmed by this prince? Jingwan raised her head to look at him and suddenly smiled. Your highness is boundlessly handsome. Everyone loves you. Flowers bloom when they see you. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows. Does she have resentment in her heart and want to find a way to tease him back? It doesn't matter if other people love me or not. Having Jiao Jiao's love is enough. Little girl with this level of skill, she still wants to tease me? Li Hongyuan calmly walked away barefooted. In fact, it wasn't impossible for him to wash Jingwan clean from head to toe. Compared to Jingwan being seen naked by other people, he was quite willing. However, he had never served anyone before. He was afraid that it would take a lot of time. If he didn't do it right, he would make Jingwan wait with an empty stomach. He would also feel distressed. He could only give up and wait for another day. Jingwan was depressed and speechless. This little rookie, shouldn't go and arm wrestle with other people whose skills have long been maxed out. Gong Mama held the pastries and turned around the screen to look at the marks on Jingwan's shoulders that were different from the color of her skin. Even if it wasn't the first time she saw it, she still found it hard to calm down. Miss, Gong Mama put the tray on the table next to the bathtub. Try these pastries and see if they are to your liking. If they are not, newbie will go and change them. Because Jingwan was uncomfortable, she shrank her body and didn't notice Gong Mama's matter-of-fact tone in Jin Qinhuang's territory. Because Gong Mama had always been an upright person, she was really afraid that her behavior would make her unhappy. She wrapped her arms around her chest and wanted to cover the marks on her body. However, there were marks all over her body. How could she cover it up? Instead, there was a smell of wanting to cover it up. Mama, Gong Mama reached out and began to wash Jingwan's hair. This is not Mrs.'s fault. Miss doesn't need to care about it. It's just that this man can't be pampered or indulged. They are used to giving an inch for a foot. Therefore, Miss should refuse when you should refuse. If you comply with everything he wants, the only one who will suffer will be yourself. Originally, her skin was as white as snow, but now, it definitely wouldn't disappear in a few days. That living Hell King didn't want to let Miss know before because he had some misgivings. This time it was not an ordinary kind of ruthless. Jingwan was speechless. Mama, your style seems to be a bit wrong. However, Jingwan chose to keep quiet at this time. She said in her heart, Mama, the other person is a Wang Ya. The consequences of refusing will be very serious. Moreover, your family's miss, I am also not living up to expectations. I can't help but sink into it. Therefore, this thing really does a lot of harm. After Gong Mama helped her wash her hair, she also loosened her muscles and bones. After Jingwan finished washing and drying her hair, she found that everything inside was very complete. The clothes were also prepared. They were brand new and fit her very well. It was as if the clothes were tailor-made. The material was of the highest quality, the workmanship was exquisite, the embroidery was first class, and there were also some ingenious little designs. In her opinion, the high-end goods from her previous life were probably just like this. Even if people were of the same age, there would be differences in height, weight, and weight. Moreover, she worked out all year round, so there were many parts of her body that were stronger than other girls. Although it wasn't to the extent that her muscles were protruding, the minute details of her body were still different. These clothes were definitely made according to her standard measurements. Originally, she thought that the other things here might have been used by unknown people, so she felt a little uncomfortable in her heart and didn't want to use them. However, upon closer inspection, it seemed that all of them were brand new. Moreover, from the way they were placed, it seemed that no one had moved them after they moved in. This intention. Jingwan frowned. Mama Gong saw Jingwan's expression, but didn't say anything. "Miss, please sit down first. This servant will comb your hair." Jingwan nodded. Jingwan heard the sound of footsteps. It was very light, but she knew who it was. Sure enough, when the person appeared, he was neat and tidy from head to toe, not a single hair out of place. However, he wasn't wearing the commonly seen black brocade clothes but moonlight silk. That's right, it was blue moonlight silk. The surface seemed to be flowing with moonlight and it looked extremely luxurious. Even the embroidery thread used on it had the same effect, and it didn't spoil the overall effect at all. Because of this set of clothes, it softened the violent aura on his body. In addition to his good mood, it complemented each other even more. Every move of his showed an extremely good bearing and cultivation. He was a complete nobleman. At the same time, that restrained aura gave him a confidence that the world was under his control. Because of this confidence, he was indifferent, calm, and even leisurely. Li Hongyuan took the comb from Mama Gong's hand and combed Jingwan's hair. Jingwan was about to say something, but she seemed to think of something. She hesitated and didn't say anything. As he combed Jingwan's hair bit by bit, he couldn't help but think of the time when he was with her in his previous life. No matter whether he had recovered or not, she would comb his hair every day. She was very attentive, careful, and gentle. Seeing Li Hongyuan in a daze, Mama Gong reminded him softly, "Your Highness." Li Hongyuan casually returned the comb to her and sat to the side. Eunuch Mu served him a cup of tea. At this time, the screen had been removed, the bathtub had been taken out, the floor and other places were cleaned, and needless to say, the bed outside was cleaned. Li Hongyuan sipped the tea leisurely and watched Mama Gong comb Jingwan's hair. Mama Gong's movements were swift, and it didn't take long for her to finish. She hesitated for a moment and then opened one of the jewelry boxes on the dressing table. Inside was a set of light pink pearl head ornaments. Mama Gong's eyes brightened. She didn't need to look at other things, just this set was very suitable for this young lady's clothes. Jingwan looked at Mama Gong's impolite appearance and was speechless again. "This isn't you, wake up quickly, Jingwan found out that her mama seemed to have a big opinion of Jin Qinhuang, but she couldn't do anything to the other party. So she used this kind of piling on the other party's things to take revenge on the other party? Thinking about what Mama Gong said before, it was right for her to throw a tantrum at Jin Qinhuang. Now it was also right for him to take revenge. Why did it seem like Jin Qinhuang owed her? However, she didn't know where to put those things from before, so she couldn't refuse. Jingwan stood up and automatically turned in a circle in front of Li Hongyuan. "Does it look good?" No matter what, it was the other party's things. He should admire it and at the same time, let him find a sense of accomplishment from her. Li Hongyuan nodded. His family's Jiao was really beautiful. Getting up, he pulled Jingwan's hand. "Let's go, let's eat." Jingwan was indeed hungry. Seeing the fruit on the table before and the delicious dishes, her stomach became even hungrier. There were only 8 dishes and 2 soups. For a Qinhuang's identity, it really wasn't much, but it looked like they were all excellent. Li Hongyuan waved away the maidservants who were preparing to serve the dishes, and personally ladled half a bowl of soup for Jingwan. Things that shouldn't be done by him, he had done it again and again. Jingwan was now a lot calmer, but politeness demands politeness. She also ladled half a bowl for Li Hongyuan. "Oh, is this the young couple having a meal intimately?" A teasing and frivolous voice sounded. Chapter 160. Compared to the last time at Rouge Pavilion, her clothes were thinner, her waist was tighter, and her breasts were even more swollen. She leisurely walked in like a cat, her plump buttocks swaying left and right. She charmingly smiled at Jingwon, blinked her eyes and waved her hand at Jingwon in a flirtatious manner. At this moment, Jingwon really didn't know what kind of expression to take out to face her. On the contrary, Li Hongyuan didn't even lift his eyelids as he picked up a piece of fish with the bones removed and placed it in Jingwon's bowl. Still not hungry? Hurry and eat. That attitude was as if he completely treated Yun Yang as an invisible person. Feeding his hungry wife was the most important thing. As for the rest, don't mention Grandaunt. Even if Imperial Grandfather crawled out of the Imperial Mausoleum, he would have to stand aside. Seeing this, Jingwon hesitated for a moment. Her stomach was indeed hungry. It was true that the other party was once a princess, but she didn't know Moreover, she was in front of a certain Qinwang. Therefore Jingwon concentrated on eating. Yun Yang saw a certain unfilial grandson ignoring her, and her mood wasn't so wonderful. Princess He Yang, who was in a bad mood, rolled her eyes. That bellyful of bad water seemed to overflow from her eyes, and the red mole under the corner of her right eye became even redder. Swaying her waist, she walked to Li Hongyuan's side and boldly threw herself on Li Hongyuan's body. She stretched out her finger to point at Li Hongyuan's head. You heartless man, forgetting the old when there's a new person. In vain, Nuja treated you wholeheartedly in vain, yet you are so heartless and cruel. While speaking, she pretended to rub the corner of her eye. Jingwon looked at her in surprise. She should say that she really deserved to be called the Princess He Yang who dared to raise a gigolo and was unrestrained, single-handedly beheading the Northern Hun king. If it was another person who would dare to casually throw herself on a man. Moreover, the other person was her own grandnephew. When she saw that Yun Yang deliberately pressed those 2 lumps on Jin Qinwang's chest to change shape, she couldn't stop the corners of her mouth from twitching. Li Hongyuan's face was as dark as ink. Originally, it was not easy for him to hold the wife he had been longing for a long time today. Although he did not eat to his heart's content, it did not change the fact that he was in a good mood. Unfortunately, there was someone who did not know what was good for them and came to make trouble. Even his personal attendants did not allow them to get close to him, let alone an old woman who did not want to do it. In addition, the smell of cosmetics was completely different from Jiao Jiao's, which seriously affected his appetite. Scram! The living king of hell unleashed his tyrannical aura. He was furious, ruthless, and cold. The 3 words, living king of hell, were vividly displayed at this moment. Even though Princess He Yang, who had experienced great winds and waves, experienced killing on the battlefield, and had traveled extensively for several decades, at this moment, she still felt a burst of fear and trepidation. She had long known that this grandnephew was not simple. Among the princes, he was the most ferocious beast that lay dormant in the dark. Although she did not know what he did specifically, but every time the other princes suffered a great loss, he was most likely involved in it. Compared to the other grandnephews who abided by the rules and talked about bearing, but were actually just sanctimonious hypocrites, it was clear that Li Hongyuan, this grandnephew who did not take etiquette seriously like her, was more liked by her. However, this brat sometimes had a bad temper as well as his private insidiousness and viciousness, which made people loathe him. Yun Yang paused and then sat upright as if nothing had happened. She flung the fragrant handkerchief in her hand. What's the matter? Are you worried that your wife will be jealous? Li Hongyuan ignored her once again and patted Jingwon's head. At that moment, the intimidating aura he exuded earlier was gone. Are you scared? Don't worry, Ben Wang will target anyone but you. Hurry up and eat, don't mind this old woman. Li Hongyuan was a bit frightening just now, but Jingwon was not frightened. She had a feeling of, so the rumors were not false. In front of her, Jin Qinwang really restrained his temper. It's just that, to say that Princess He Yang was an old woman, wasn't that the same as specifically picking on people to step on? Yun Yang looked much younger than her actual age. Her figure was well maintained and the clothes she wore were more colorful. It could be seen that she cared a lot about her age and absolutely refused to accept that she was old. With a glance, sure enough, the one with a black face became Yun Yang. The seductive aura on her body was swept away, adding a bit of sharpness. Unfortunately, to Li Hongyuan there was no threat at all. No matter what you did, he would remain unmoved. Moreover, this was his territory. If you annoyed him, it was possible that he would throw you out. This kind of thing he would definitely do it. Speaking of how many men Yun-yang had played in the palm of her hand in this lifetime, she had suffered a big loss at Li Hongyuan's hands. She had always wanted to secretly make up for it, but it was very obvious that she had not been successful. As for using his secret to threaten him, she was afraid that as soon as there was a sign of that he would have already silenced her. Yun-yang was very clear about this point. Ever since she received some information about Li Hongyuan's nature, he directly sent a person to her. Serving was one aspect, but as for the nature of it, everyone was well aware. Yun-yang calmly accepted it and used it without the slightest trace of politeness. Yun-yang couldn't do anything to him. She rolled her eyes and her gaze fell on Jingwan. Then she thought about the attitude this king of hell had towards her and shifted her gaze. "Little girl, do you know who I am?" Jingwan hesitated for a moment, but still decided to tell the truth. "I heard grandmother mention it." "Luo Qinsher? Why did she mention this servant to you?" Yun-yang asked with interest. "Because after seeing Yun-yang in Rouge Pavilion, I went back and mentioned it to grandmother. Grandmother said that it must be you. After all, she had a deep impression of you. Speaking of which, she could not expose her own nanny. On the contrary, it was better to let her grandmother take the blame." Yun-yang would not go to her grandmother to ask for confirmation, so the lie would not be exposed. Oh, Luo Qinsher should have a deep impression of this servant. After all, this servant almost pulled your grandfather to bed at that time. Yun-yang giggled like a young girl. Jingwan laughed and shook her head. Things are different from what Yun-yang thought. Grandmother said that Yun-yang has a good memory and has seen a lot. Although you are a girl, you do what men do. You care about the country and the world. Women are not inferior to men. Moreover, your heart is more tender to women than men. Even many women are still moved by you. Grandmother even said that if Yunying was not married, she might also fall in love with you." "Did Luo Qinsher really say that?" Yun-yang laughed and patted the table. "If this is the case, why should I care about Luo Peishan? I should just hook up with Luo Qinsher." Seeing that Yun-yang revealed her true colors, Jingwan coughed softly and chuckled. "Yun-yang, image lady." Turning her eyes, Yun-yang revealed a coquettish expression and even gave Jingwan a shy smile. "Don't be so pretentious and disgusting here," Li Hongyuan said lightly. "Can your wife make you pregnant?" "Disgusting my ass," Yun-yang retorted without any trace of politeness. Cough. Jingwan choked and coughed, quickly covering her mouth. She was indeed Princess Heong. When she became fierce, she was really... Li Hongyuan glanced at her coldly. "Watch your words. If you lead Jiao Jiao astray, this prince will burn down your Rouge Pavilion." Yun-yang suddenly reached out and pulled Jingwan's arm. She rolled up her sleeve and saw the red plum blossoms on it. Seeing this, she sneered. "Do you think you are a good person? Would a normal man do such a thing to his fiancée? Burn down my Rouge Pavilion? Right now your wife has a share. If you have the guts, then go burn it." Li Hongyuan slapped her hand away and rolled down Jingwan's sleeve. "If I burn down your Rouge Pavilion, this prince can give her a bigger one." He was very rich and overbearing, very disdainful. "Why don't you ask if your wife is willing to be raised by you?" Yun-yang felt that this Luo family's third daughter was actually very similar to her in some aspects. He had never thought of relying on a man. This time Yun-yang simply poked a hornet's nest. How could Jingwan be the same as this old woman? Wan indeed did not rely on a man, but it did not mean that she would accept anything. She did not rely on feelings. She wanted to be equal and never betray each other. Material things were just an additional product on this foundation. If she accepted you as her person, then whatever you gave her, no matter how much it was, she would gladly accept it. The problem now was that Jingwan did not care because she did not care about him, so she did not care about what he gave her. He wanted to raise Jingwan into Jiao Jiao. He wanted to give Jingwan the best and most things in the world, but the most important problem was not solved. At that moment, Yun-yang only felt that she was being targeted by a poisonous snake that could bite her at any time. She would die in an instant. Her scalp was numb and her back was cold. "Yuan." Jingwan reached out and placed her hand on the back of Li Hongyuan's hand. Li Hongyuan instantly returned to his senses. Seeing Jingwan's slender hand, he suddenly hooked his lips into a smile, as if spring had returned to the earth. He turned his hand and held Jingwan's hand. "It's been half a day and you haven't eaten much. Hurry up and eat, otherwise the dishes will be cold. If you have anything to say, say it after you finish eating." It really made people see how temperamental he could be. But Jingwan did not know why she blurted out his name so quickly, forgetting the awkwardness caused by Yun Yang rolling up her sleeve. What was even more inconceivable was that Jin Qinhuang's heart was so easily appeased by her. It seemed that her influence on him was so deep that it was somewhat inconceivable. Jingwan suppressed the doubts and uneasiness in her heart and nodded her head. Yun Yang narrowed her eyes, containing a deep sharpness, looking at Li Hongyuan. Then she looked at Jingwan with a profound gaze. She did not tactfully disturb their meal and slowly got up. "Come find me after you finish eating," regarding the situation at the western border. Then her figure swayed as she left. "Jiao Jiao, don't worry about her. She's just the owner of a rouge shop." If the situation at the border was not mentioned, she was indeed just the owner of a rouge shop. But when it came to the Qiyuan dynasty, then she was the one who killed the king of the northern Xiongnu, the one who reversed the deadlock between the Qiyuan and the northern Xiongnu Princess Hiyang. Also, he seemed to intend to let her know more things about him, those secret, unknown things. When she saw the tip of the iceberg, it was already destined that they could no longer be separated unless she died, annulling the engagement before marriage, and she should not think about it in the future. Jingwan calmly continued to eat. Chapter 161. Jingwan continued to eat calmly. As for whether she was really calm or just pretending to be calm, only she herself knew. Li Hongyuan was wholeheartedly focused on feeding Jingwan. Other things, whether it was Princess Haiyang or the situation at the border, were put aside. What he changed was mainly in the imperial city of Qiyuan. Except for Jingwan, he secretly gathered forces and secretly changed the structure of the imperial court. On the surface, it was not much different from the previous life. The biggest change was probably Luo Peishan. In the previous life, he always kept a low profile and basically did not participate in the fight for the throne. Outside the imperial city, there were naturally officials who were transferred, but everything was under control and there were no problems for the time being. Moreover, there were many spies planted in various countries outside the Qiyuan. However, these spies were only focused on collecting information and were not allowed to act rashly without orders. These spies did not even know who their real masters were. So far, the situation outside the Qiyuan had basically not changed. Therefore, even if Princess Haiyang didn't tell him about the situation at the western border, he also knew what was going on. It was just a small problem, but this small problem originated from the internal affairs of Qiyuan. In his previous life, if it wasn't solved properly, this small problem would lead to a big disaster. In the end, these soldiers united with the local military families who had been in business for 2 or 3 generations and became the local bullies, oppressing the ordinary people. As a result, the matter was reported to the court. His father sent people to deal with it, and Old Ninth and Old Tenth, who had just entered the imperial court, became imperial envoys. However, these 2 people were not young and their respective families were also ambitious. They secretly urged them to do all kinds of things, and naturally they had different opinions on this matter. In the end, because they could not reach an agreement, the problem was not solved for a long time. Due to the instigation of people with ulterior motives, it caused a riot. One of the emperor's sons, the Prince of Qiyuan, was injured in the riot and the other was arrested. The imperial court was divided into 2 factions. One faction advocated pacification and the other faction advocated suppression. On the surface, Emperor Luqing was an emperor who did not like to fight. In the end, he made the decision to pacify the people, but he could not tolerate the culprits who caused the riot. After all, this matter made him lose face. However, when the imperial envoys were still on the way, the conflict at the border escalated again. The angry mob cut off one of Old Tenth's arms. The local garrison took the initiative to use bloody measures to suppress the riot. When there was suppression, there would naturally be resistance. However, the other party was a civilian after all. Even if they posed a threat to the garrison in the beginning, the consequences were self-evident. Moreover, the garrison was hot-tempered. In the end, he ordered the old, the weak, the women and the children to be killed. One could imagine how big of a shock it caused. More importantly, the news of this matter was leaked from the beginning. Under the arrangement of people with ulterior motives, almost everyone in Qiyuan knew about it as if it had grown wings. This caused the people's hearts to be unstable, and even the ruling status of the Li dynasty was questioned. When it rains, it pours. Not long after that, there was a big flood in the south and millions of people suffered. Because of the inaction of the officials, there were very few problems with the embankments. In the end, Emperor Lucheng was the one who took the blame for this disaster. Before Emperor Lucheng's decree of guilt was issued, the victims revolted and robbed the local granaries. Moreover, the rich families and many of the officials did not have a good ending. In the end, the army was naturally deployed. It did not take long, about a month or so, to quell the riot. Fortunately, other places were already prepared, and the enemy country did not take the opportunity to attack Qiyuan. After all, even if there was internal strife in Qiyuan, it was still under control. To a certain extent, Qiyuan was also a huge monster. If they wanted to take a bite out of it, it would depend on whether they had the ability to do so. After this incident, Emperor Lucheng's face was gloomy for a long time. He originally thought that the enemy country was behind this, but in the end, it was completely an internal strife. In his previous life, Li Hongyuan was far less favored than he was now. Because he was outstanding and had a good reputation, he was qualified to compete for the throne. His father should have felt guilty towards him, but because he was outstanding, he was not liked. Because he was a Japanese, he was seen as an ominous person, and he was not qualified to covet the throne. However, he did not know that, and he was quite sad at that time. After this incident, his father disliked him even more. At first he was puzzled. What did this have to do with him? Gradually, some rumors about his birth mother quietly spread. His birth mother was from the Pei family, the most powerful family in Jiangnan, and she was the daughter of the first wife. The Pei family was loyal to the royal family of the previous dynasty. The Pei family was not willing to be loyal to the new emperor, so they reached an agreement with the new emperor and retreated to Jiangnan. It was said that the Pei family was involved in the riot at the beginning and the later uprising. However, there was no evidence. It should be known that Taizu had personally decreed that unless the Pei family committed a great crime of rebellion, the emperor of the Li family could not embarrass the Pei family. Without evidence, it meant that the Pei family could not be touched. Even if they wanted to secretly do something, it was not so easy. Because the Pei family was flourishing in Jiangnan, except for not entering the court as an official, they were involved in all other aspects. In particular, the Pei family had produced many famous scholars. These people had many disciples, and many of these disciples had entered the court as officials. Did you think that the Pei family had no influence in the court because they did not enter the court? Naive. Moreover, the Pei family had a high reputation among the people. Touching the Pei family was equivalent to touching the entire Jiangnan, and a large number of officials might be dismissed. It was even more difficult to deal with than the Sun family, which had Duke Dinghua. No emperor would like such a large and uncontrollable clan. Li Hongyuan, a son with the bloodline of the Pei clan, was naturally the target of his anger at this time. To some extent, this was the beginning of the change of Li Hongyuan's fate. But now, when Princess Heong learned a little through her Rouge Pavilion, Li Hongyuan had already arranged everything. He still did not touch the overall situation, but only controlled the person who fanned the flames behind the scenes and planned everything. He would probably be sent to the capital soon. Li Hongyuan wanted to see if the person who was said to have died early in his previous life was a member of the Pei family. Mother's family? Oh, the tyrant Li Hongyuan had cut off more than half of the branches of the Pei family. The ones who went to deal with this matter were probably Old Ninth and Old Tenth. He had already removed the biggest disaster, but he did not know what their ending would be. If it was good, they would probably return with meritorious service. If it was bad, they would probably come back after messing things up. They would probably be trained and then abandoned by the people they relied on. Their lives would be over. As for the flood in the south, he had already made preparations 2 years ago. He had already strengthened the dam in the key areas. Although it was impossible to completely eliminate the flood, the serious consequences of the disaster would be reduced by at least 60%. As for the people who wanted to take advantage of this situation to cause trouble, he had already set up a trap. As long as they dared to make a move, they would immediately become a turtle in a jar. Jingwan saw that Li Hongyuan was lost in thought, so she did not disturb him. However, she saw him drinking cup after cup as if he didn't know what was going on. Moreover, he hadn't eaten anything in the first place, so it would definitely hurt his stomach. After all, he was her fiancé. Previously, they had hugged and lingered together, and he was very indulgent towards her. She hesitated for a moment. Your Highness, drinking on an empty stomach is harmful to the body. It's better to drink less. Otherwise, you should eat something first. Li Hongyuan looked at her with a smile as if he had never been distracted. Jiao Jiao, are you worried about this prince? Jingwan also smiled, and there was no trace of the pitiful appearance from before. If your highness wants to think so, it's not impossible. It's not easy to hear good words from Jiao Jiao's mouth. Alright, I won't drink anymore. He casually threw the cup away. He picked up his chopsticks and hastily ate something. Jiao Jiao, are you done eating? Generally speaking, if the other party was done eating, she would eat well. If the other party wasn't done eating, she would continue to eat with them. However, when she thought about how they were still unmarried and how much he indulged her, she chose to be willful this time. She nodded. This subject's daughter is done eating. Li Hongyuan put down his chopsticks and approached Jingwan with a teasing smile. Jiao Jiao, you're putting out all the rules now. You weren't like this before. You were pinching and biting this prince, and you even had the guts to tell this prince to shut up? Jingwan blushed. What was she talking about that she shouldn't talk about? What, did he want to settle the score with her now? Jingwan didn't speak and just looked at him quietly. In the end, she wasn't as conservative as the local girls. This matter had already happened and she had already been embarrassed. There was no point in continuing to hold on to it. Li Hongyuan was worried that if he annoyed her, it wouldn't be easy to eat her in the future. He reached out and pinched her face. This prince really doesn't know what to do with you. Without saying much, Eunuch Mu immediately called for someone to bring water to wash her hands and rinse her mouth. Li Hongyuan already wanted to help Jingwan wash her hands, but Jingwan avoided and refused. He raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. Forget about the others, just wear these Buddhist prayer beads. Li Hongyuan took off the Buddhist prayer beads and wrapped them around Jingwan's wrist. Let's go, this prince will send you back. In fact, if he could, he wanted to keep Jingwan for a while longer. But it wasn't a short time. If he annoyed old Madame Luo, it would be disadvantageous for him to see Jingwan before the marriage. Although they had done more intimate things, but this kind of intimacy still made Jingwan somewhat at a loss. They had only met a few times before, so it didn't make sense for their relationship to suddenly become so close. Although it was mostly Jin Qinhuang's one-sided actions, he seemed to be very familiar with her. Everything he did seemed natural and casual. No matter who saw him, they wouldn't feel that he was a stranger. Other than this subject's third sister-in-law, is this how Wang Ye treats all of his previous fiancés? Jingwan curiously asked. Really, it was just purely out of curiosity. Li Hongyuan glanced at her and indifferently said, Ben Wang is not familiar with them. I haven't seen more than half of them. So the topic stopped and didn't continue. Li Hongyuan held her hand and matched her pace, walking slower. The courtyard next door is about the same size as this one. In front is Rouge Pavilion. This was originally Yun Yang's place. I want to renovate it. Jingwan knew that Jin Qinhuang was revealing some secrets to her. So she only had ears and not a mouth. Jiao Jiao, you and I are together. You don't have to be so careful. My matters, there is nothing that you can't know. Many thanks for Wang Ye's love, but this subject's daughter feels that it is not the right time. Li Hongyuan helplessly sighed and didn't say anything more. Getting on the carriage, Li Hongyuan still pulled her into his arms and hugged her. It was just a simple hug. After sending Jingwan back to Luojia, he saw her enter the door and her figure disappear. Only then did he let someone drive the carriage away. He didn't go to find Yun Yang. Instead, he directly returned to the Wangfu. In front of the gate of the Wangfu, there was an honored guest waiting for him. This old subject greets Wang Ye. The Grand Secretary came to the Yamen very early today. Li Hongyuan sat in the carriage. He just lifted the curtain and didn't have any intention of getting off. There is nothing to do today. Therefore, the officials of Qiyuan were relatively free. After finishing their work, they could occasionally leave early. What business do you have with Ben Wang? If Wang Ye is dissatisfied with my daughter, you can ask His Majesty to withdraw the order. There is no need to humiliate her like this. Wan Ruizhong said as calmly as possible. Heaven knows how distressed he was when he returned home and saw his wife and daughter crying until their eyes were swollen. Li Hongyuan sneered. Wan Darren has always been dissatisfied with Ben Wang. You wanted to be a good subject, so you didn't resist the decree. Why should Ben Wang be a disobedient son? You flaunted yourself as a loyal subject of the country. For this, you can give up your beloved daughter's happiness, but you want Ben Wang to bear the reputation of being disloyal and unfilial. Do you really think that it doesn't matter if Ben Wang is covered in dirty water? Wan Ruizhong, Don't be too obvious about your double loyalty. Wan Ruizhong's old face reddened. Li Hongyuan's words were not completely correct, but also not completely wrong. His lips trembled. In the end, my daughter is your fiancée. Wang Ye knows that she has always admired you, so he didn't talk about marriage. Chapter 162. Even if Li Hongyuan's words implied that his daughter was looking for humiliation, Wan Ruizhong had nothing to say. That's right, his daughter was just a concubine. In the end, she was just a concubine, and from the looks of it, the main character didn't seem to want her very much. It was also true that he indulged her. Every time he saw her silently crying in front of him without making a fuss, he would feel distressed. Then, without exception, his heart would soften every time. However, from the bottom of his heart he looked down on Jin Qinhuang, thinking that he was just a big fire pit. On this point he firmly refused his daughter, always waiting for her to give up. Then he delayed again and again, resulting in today's bad consequences. His daughter was beautiful, had a good temperament, was talented, and was even a good cook. Apart from her lack of temperament in other aspects, he wasn't boasting, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find a girl more outstanding than her. Originally, there were a lot of talented young men to choose from, and in the future she wouldn't be bad. In the end, why did she have to take a fancy to someone that everyone else avoided? Just like him, he couldn't figure it out. It wasn't like he had to go to the Gong Prince's residence. Why did he have to get involved at this critical juncture? Li Hongyuan saw his constantly changing complexion and could probably guess what he was thinking. Wan Ruizhong was born to mix in with the officialdom, therefore the ups and downs of the officialdom to him didn't affect him at all. Overcoming 5 difficulties and defeating 6 generals to reach the position of Grand Secretary of the Cabinet. All of this showed his extraordinary ability and extraordinary wisdom. However, such a man also had a fatal weakness. Because of his self-confidence, he was conceited, thinking that he would succeed in every endeavor. This was also true for women, so his second wife was obedient to him in every way, taking care of the inner residence properly, treating the children of the first wife as her own, and treating the children born of concubines as if they were her own. In his opinion, this was how it should be. That woman did a good job, so he gave her all his trust, never intervening in the inner residence, never paying attention to it, so naturally he didn't know what kind of scene was behind the orderly appearance of his family's inner residence. In the end, it wasn't that he trusted his wife, but that he believed in his own charm. However, why didn't he think about it? What right did he have? Her daughter-in-law was older than her. After marrying into the family, not only did she become a stepmother, but she also became a step-grandmother. You would find it too old to be a father. How could a teenage girl not have any complaints? Even the emperor who ruled the world did not have such confidence, right? Now his wife was like a young married woman. When the two of them stood together, not to mention father and daughter, people would believe that they were grandfather and granddaughter. Not to mention other things, could he still get hard to satisfy his wife? Although it was normal for a woman to be alone after 30, and if that woman was really a good wife and mother, then it was fine. However, Li Hongyuan, who knew her nature, sometimes even maliciously thought, "Our powerful Grand Secretary, do you know how many green hats you've worn?" Wan Ruizhong, who had been a winner in life for decades, ended up having his entire family executed in his twilight years. First, it was revealed that his stepwife had an affair with his son, and it seemed that they didn't even have the same son. Then it was revealed that the youngest daughter of his first wife was not his biological daughter and belonged to some unknown man. Then it was revealed that a letter of treason was found in his study. Of course, when these things happened, Li Hongyuan had already been forced to leave the capital. Qi Yuan was in the midst of a war at the border. When he returned, the Yuan family's matter had already come to an end. There was no way to know the details. He only found out by chance that Wan Fengfei had married someone else and did not know where she went. Plus, she was not Wan Ruizhong's biological daughter, so he did not pursue her whereabouts. In this life, because treason was not something that could be done in a short time, and Wan Fengfei was far more persistent in him than in his previous life, Li Hongyuan had carefully investigated from the beginning. The results he obtained were really unexpected. Wan Ruizhong, who had been shrewd all his life, fell into the hands of a woman. He was cuckolded and took the blame for someone else. He probably did not know what had happened even when he died. When he found out the truth, Li Hongyuan suspected that Wan Ruizhong's stepwife might not have died in his previous life. She had hidden it well for more than 20 years. Why would she suddenly reveal everything? These things might just be to divert other people's attention to hide her true identity. If the water was mixed up, it would be easier for her to escape. Wan Ruizhong was so conceited, and Wan Fengfei was quite similar to him in this aspect. Therefore, Li Hongyuan was a little surprised that Wan Fengfei was not his daughter. However, whether she was or not, it did not matter to him. Fortunately, Wan Ruizhong was not like that when it came to political affairs. Otherwise, he would have probably fallen into a trap long ago. Seeing that there was no doubt about his ability, Li Hongyuan would definitely keep him for a few more years. Didn't he want to work hard for Qi Yuan until he died? If he did not squeeze all of his value out of him, wouldn't he be letting him down? However, he had to let him have a taste of falling into the dust. He had to let him know the truth bit by bit and see what kind of things the mother and daughter he held in the palm of his hand were. At that time, the expression of the Grand Secretary of the Cabinet should be very interesting. Li Hongyuan leaned lazily. He was in a good mood now, so he calmly added another stab to the Grand Secretary. Wan Ruizhong, you don't like this prince, but do you think this prince likes you and Wan Fengfei? Only you think that your daughter is a national beauty, a rare commodity worth hoarding. You treat her as a treasure, but in this prince's eyes she is not even a blade of grass. In fact, you should be glad that you did not compromise and ask Imperial Father to grant you a marriage a year or two earlier. Otherwise, you and your daughter would have lost all face at that time. Did you know that if your good daughter enters the imperial family, she can't be the official wife because of Master Liaochen's order? She wants to marry this prince wholeheartedly, so she will live the life of a concubine for the rest of her life. Wan Ruizhong was shocked speechless, as if he had been struck by a bolt from the blue. Li Hongyuan told him that he was not worried that he would say anything. It was impossible for him to ask his imperial father for confirmation, and it was even more impossible for him to tell his good wife and daughter. However, even if he said it, it didn't matter. So what if he already knew about it? Leaving behind Lord Ruan, who was stunned for a long time, Li Hongyuan returned home. However, when Yun Yang found out that Li Hongyuan had sent her little sweetheart home, he did not even think of looking for her. Who knew if she would fly into a rage? However, even Emperor Lu Qing could not do anything to her, let alone her hidden grandaunt. When Jingwan returned to the Luo residence, she had completely changed her clothes. However, the people who saw her along the way did not seem to have any abnormalities. Everyone was even curious as to why she came back so late. Back then, when Luo Jingying had sneaked out and returned, she had even changed back into her original outfit. She had been hiding all the way, but in the end things had turned out this way. Now that Jingwan was so open and above board, no one suspected anything. This was the biggest difference between being liked and disliked by the elders of the inner residence. When Jingwan returned to the elegant begonia residence, Sun Yijia had been waiting for a long time. When she saw that Jingwan had changed from head to toe, she would never pay attention to how expensive the things on her body were. Instead, she would pay attention to the problem behind this matter. Just imagine a girl went out alone with her fiancé for more than 2 hours. Moreover, she had completely changed her clothes. Anyone who knew a little would understand what this meant. If Sun Yijia did not have a good upbringing, she would not just be a little angry and irritable. When she saw that someone was more nervous than her, the knot in Jingwan's heart gradually disappeared. The lingering touch on her body also faded a lot. On the contrary, she felt quite happy. She smiled and said, "Sister-in-law, what are you doing? What are you smiling about? Look at the situation now. How can you still smile?" Sun Yijia could not help but pinch her. Jingwan smiled and dodged. At the same time, she grabbed her hand. "You're speaking so seriously. Is the sky collapsing or the earth sinking?" When Sun Yijia saw her reaction, she thought that she was overthinking. Then she subconsciously reached out to pull Jingwan's collar. She only pulled it open a little. Her face was as black as the bottom of a pot. "I knew it. How can that bastard be a gentleman?" Jingwan hurriedly pulled her hand away. She really wanted to call her ancestor. She knew that she had good intentions, but she should at least take it easy. This was only her. If it were someone else, wouldn't it be embarrassing to expose such an embarrassing matter in public? Wouldn't that make them want to die of shame? Sun Yijia also belatedly realized that something was wrong. But she couldn't help but worry. "Wan Mimi, other than this, is there anything else that does it hurt there?" She leaned closer and lowered her voice to ask hesitantly. Jingwan was speechless. But at this time she could only pretend to be stupid. With a puzzled face she asked, "Where does it hurt?" "It doesn't hurt anywhere." Sun Yijia breathed a sigh of relief. "It doesn't hurt anywhere. There's nothing at all." But she muttered, "At least that bastard still has some humanity." Although this body's age was younger than Sun Yijia, in reality, it treated her as a younger sister. However, this sister-in-law was also worth it. After she approved of you, she would also treat you wholeheartedly. Not to mention other things, when she was bestowed marriage to Jin Qinhuang, she did not say a word. But when it came to her own head, she had always been nervous. Even if she couldn't do anything, she still had to accept this favor. "Jia Mimi, don't worry. It's really fine." Sun Yijia was like a frosted eggplant, wilting in the blink of an eye. Ever since she married Jingbo, Wan Mimi didn't call her Jia Mimi anymore. This was really comforting her. She was a little annoyed. "Maybe I shouldn't have told you these things. The more I say, the earlier you worry about the future. If you didn't know, you could still live a carefree life before you got married. But now, the things that should be known and the things that shouldn't be known will be known sooner or later. Even if it wasn't sister-in-law who told me, it would have been someone else. In reality, it's better to know from you than from someone else. After all, if I wasn't mentally prepared and was suddenly ridiculed by someone, I might not even know what was going on. So I should actually thank Jia Mimi." Sun Yijia rolled her eyes at her. "You can keep comforting me." Jingwan pulled her to the side and sat down. "Sister-in-law, I feel that your mood seems a little unstable these days. Why don't you call the food doctor to take a look?" "Really? I don't think so. It's you who thinks I'm annoying." Jingwan was helpless and didn't mention it. On the other hand, Sun Yijia's wet nurse's expression was a little strange. The two of them didn't see it, but Mama Gong saw it. "Third young madam, this servant knows a little about medicine and can accurately feel some common pulses. Why don't you let this servant take a look at you and treat it as a check of your pulse? That's good. Now that there's a result, this lass won't make up stories about me." As she spoke, she raised her hand and showed Mama Gong her wrist. As soon as Nanny Gong put her finger on her pulse, she felt that something was wrong. However, she couldn't be careless about this kind of thing. After a while, she asked her to use her other hand. Her serious attitude made the people around her nervous. "Gong Mimi, is there something wrong? Young madam's appetite hasn't been good these days and she's been feeling nauseous. I'm worried that she has eaten something bad, but young madam refuses to ask the food doctor to take a look." Sun Yijia's wet nurse couldn't care less at this moment. After all, she hadn't been married into the Luo family for long. If she mobilized so many people to ask for a doctor, she was worried that others would think that she was being nosy. "Sister-in-law, this is wrong. How can you hide this kind of thing? It's just that my appetite hasn't been very good. It's just a small matter. Perhaps it's because the weather is hot. I've been suffering from summer." "Third young madam, you're wrong this time. It's not just a small matter. It's a big matter." Seeing that everyone was nervous, especially her young lady who was asking about what was wrong, Mama Gong didn't keep them in suspense. "Third young madam didn't eat something bad. She's pregnant. She's been pregnant for more than a month. I think she got pregnant a few days after the wedding. It's a joyous occasion." "That's impossible." Sun Yijia was stunned for a moment before she immediately denied it. "She got pregnant on her period last time." Mama Gong looked like she understood. Even if third young madam was young and didn't know anything, her wet nurse by her side should know. So this was the problem. This kind of situation does happen. Some people will have this kind of situation in the first month of pregnancy. It's just that it's much less than normal and it doesn't last that long. "Gong Mimi, now that you mention it, I'm afraid this matter is not far from the truth." Sun Yijia's wet nurse looked very excited and a little upset. "I've heard of this kind of situation. Why didn't I think of it? My good sister, is there anything wrong with third young madam's condition? From third young madam's pulse, there's no problem. However, it's best to ask the estate's physician to take a look." Yes, you're right. I'll ask the estate's physician to take a look." Sun Yijia placed her hand on her lower abdomen. She was still in disbelief. However, when she saw her wet nurse about to leave excitedly, she quickly reached out to pull her. Wet nurse. Because she was pulling her, Sun Yijia's body suddenly moved forward, scaring her quite a bit. "My good girl, please slow down a bit." Because she was so nervous, Sun Yijia was not as nervous. "Wet nurse, don't be anxious. It's better to report this matter to mother and let her make the decision. If you go excitedly to ask the physician for help, won't the whole estate know about it? People nowadays only reported the good news after the pregnancy was stable. Before that, except for a few people who knew about it, most people kept it a secret. Go directly to grandmother. Mother doesn't care about things. If you tell her as soon as possible, she probably won't be able to hide anything without giving her time to recover. She won't care about it. Instead, she'll be glad. Jingwan said, Qingzhu, go to grandmother's place and ask the estate's physician to come here. Tell him that I'm feeling a little unwell and that he needs to take my pulse. Yes, I'll go right away. Sunny Jia's wet nurse thanked Jingwan repeatedly. This is my sister-in-law. The child in her belly is my nephew and niece. There's no need to thank me. Jingwan looked at Sunny Jia with a smile and teased. You got pregnant a few days after your wedding. Sister-in-law, are you better than my brother? Your mouth is really infuriating. Sunny Jia was embarrassed and angry. I'm wrong. You're pregnant with twins now. Take it easy. Jingwan grabbed her hand. But sister-in-law, when you're feeling unwell, the people around you listen to you and don't ask for a physician. What about my brother? Does he also listen to you? Don't blame your brother. He's been a little busy recently. I didn't let him find out. What's there to be busy with? If he can't finish it, he'll postpone it. How can he even neglect his wife? Jingwan was dissatisfied. Sunny Jia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who was to blame for this? She was the one who had been busy all day long. She just wanted her to be less busy, but she was the one who was playing the blame game. However, it wasn't a big deal to begin with. Why did little sister Wan think that her third brother had done something unforgivable? Was it that exaggerated? She may hurry and ask third young master to come over. Ask him to put those things aside. His wife and child are the most important thing now. Seeing Jingwan's tough attitude, Sunny Jia couldn't say anything to stop her. Because the couple's courtyard was just next door, Luo Jingbua came very quickly. It was obvious that he ran over directly. When Luo Jingbua appeared, he only had eyes for Sunny Jia. He didn't seem to see anything else. He carefully asked Sunny Jia if it was true. He looked very stupid. However, no one would laugh at him for becoming a father-to-be. Madame Luo came very quickly. However, she was someone who had been through a lot. Although she was happy, she definitely wouldn't lose her composure. She excused Sunny Jia from bowing and took Jingwan's hand out of habit. She looked at it until Jingwan couldn't help blushing. She then looked away, sat down and looked at Sunny Jia. Qingzhu has already told me clearly. Ijia, since you've married into the Luo family, there's no need to be so distant. Your health is the most important thing. No matter whether it's a big or small problem, you should call a doctor as soon as possible. This time it was also Wan's sudden suggestion. Otherwise, if it were up to you and Jingbua, what would you do if you accidentally hurt the child? And Jingbua, no matter what, you can't neglect your own wife. The husband and wife were very embarrassed by Madame Luo's words. They couldn't help blushing and repeatedly promised that there wouldn't be a next time. Fortunately, the resident's doctor rushed over at this time. Only then did they heave a sigh of relief. The resident's doctor took their pulse. Nurse Gong's diagnosis was correct. Both mother and child were safe. Madame Luo also couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. This was the fourth generation of the Luo family. Jingda's daughter-in-law always had problems. This was very good. Naturally, it was worth being happy about. Moreover, she got pregnant so soon. It was a good sign. However, not long after they were happy, someone barged in and shouted, "Madam, something big happened." Madame Luo's face darkened. Why are you so flustered? This is a ladies' courtyard. How dare a man like you casually barge in? The manservant's face paled. Madam, please forgive me. Madam, please forgive me. What happened? Third master fell off a horse and broke his leg. Also, his waist was stepped on by a horse. Chapter 163. Not to mention the others, even Madame Luo was shocked. This was a sign of paralysis even if she didn't die. Madame Luo calmed down and asked, "Where is your third master?" Replying to Madame Luo, he should be entering the door soon. I came back first to report. As soon as I saw Madame Luo, I went to the main courtyard to report to you. When I learned that you came to third Mrs. Courtyard, I was anxious and chased after you. Madame Luo immediately made a decision. Old doctor, I'll have to trouble you to go to the third branch. This old one will understand the matter clearly and go there immediately. As for the matter here, I ask the old doctor to take care of it. Presumably, Madame Lu also sent someone to invite him, but he also missed the opportunity. At this moment, that servant was probably also on the way to Begonia House. Madame Luo is too polite. Since he was the consecrated doctor, he must keep his mouth shut in addition to doing things for the Luo family. However, she had just found out that she was pregnant and such a disaster had happened over there. After all, it was not a good sign. Madame Luo, this old man is not particularly good at treating this kind of illness. This old man suggests that you ask the Imperial Hospital for help. It's more appropriate. Well, it was still necessary to have self-awareness. Many thanks for the old doctor's reminder. She turned around and asked her mother to go back to the main courtyard to get Luo Peishan's invitation. The old doctor cupped his hands and left first. After he left, Madame Luo began to interrogate the whole story. You should tell me everything clearly. Where did Third Miss fall off the horse and why? Now that something happened to Third Miss, you people who serve her can't escape the blame. The servant trembled and began to narrate. Today, Third Master invited someone to go out of the city to ride a horse. When they arrived at Prince Kang's farmstead, they were interested and said that they wanted to go hunting, so they went into the forest. Third Master and the others ran very fast. By the time this little one chased after them, something had already happened. Madame Luo frowned. Your Third Master doesn't like to ride horses, let alone hunt. Why would he participate in it for no reason? Who took the lead? Moreover, it's not his turn to rest today. Old Madam, it was Prince Kang's close associate who led the group. There were also several young masters from other families. There were a total of 7 or 8 people, all of whom were more or less related to Prince Kang. Third young master said that it was not good to refuse, so he changed the day of his holiday with the people from the Yamen. This was a disaster waiting to happen. However, Madame Luo suddenly realized that there must be something wrong with this. It seemed obvious who did it. Moreover, Prince Kang also had a motive to do this to the third prince. The third prince used to rely on him, but now his legitimate daughter had entered Prince Rui's mansion. Moreover, he had a bad temper and dared to betray him. Naturally, he would want to make up for it or even kill the chicken to warn the monkey. However, Madame Luo's intuition told her that this matter was not so simple. Prince Kang's brain was not as smart as Prince Rui's, but he would not be so obvious. However, she could not rule out the possibility that he deliberately arranged this, which would make people think that someone was framing him. As for the specifics, he would have to rely on his master to investigate. Why did you send your third master back? Why didn't you go straight to the clinic after entering the city? The servant swallowed his saliva. Old Madam, they refused to take over. He understood. They were too seriously injured and were afraid that he would die in their clinic. Under normal circumstances, relatives would vent their anger on them. This was because they were worried that it would bring disaster to the clinic. However, none of the people who went with him came out to vouch for him. They went back after entering the city. Madame Luo sneered. A group of cowards. However, did they think that they could get away with this? If a man stood out to take charge, the Luo family might not do anything. However, since they were cowards, then don't blame the Luo family for being impolite. Go directly to the Yamen of the Ministry of Personnel and report this matter to my master. Yes. The servant hurriedly left. Madame Luo turned her head to look at Sun Yijiao, who was rubbing her stomach with a pale face, and Luo Jinghua, who was standing beside her with his mouth tightly pursed. Don't let your imagination run wild. This has nothing to do with your child. However, Yijiao, you can't report the good news to your mother for the time being. You have to rest for a while. As for the food, you don't have a small kitchen in your courtyard, so you can use one that's one. It's close, so it won't be inconvenient. Similarly, I'll build one for you after this period of time. Later, I'll have someone send you some money and send someone to buy it outside. Each branch had their own custom of buying things in private, so it wouldn't be conspicuous. Sun Yijiao was naturally grateful for Madame Luo's arrangement. She was afraid that her child would be known as a jinx. However, she said, Grandmother, there's no need for the money. Granddaughter-in-law. Madame Luo waved her hand to interrupt her. What the family should give you naturally can't be less. Every daughter-in-law of the Luo family is the same. Your own dowry is another matter. How you want to use it is also your own business. How can you confuse it with the portion that you deserve? You should pay special attention to this point. Only take it out when it's time to take it out, and when it's time to accept it, you must accept it. If you only take it out and don't take it in after a long time, people will take it for granted, and it will also increase the appetite of some people. When you don't take it out, it will instead become your fault. Thank you for your teachings, grandmother. An elder who didn't mean well for her absolutely wouldn't say such words. Alright, hurry and wash off the makeup on your face. Jingbo, take good care of your wife. I'll go to the third branch to take a look. With Jingda's daughter-in-law as an example, Madame Luo now couldn't bear to see a pregnant woman put on makeup. Moreover, Sun Yijia didn't use makeup powder. Who knew if there was something harmful in it? Although she knew that if Wan dared to use something on her face, she should have already thought about it. Normally there wouldn't be any problems. But now both mother and son were delicate, so she had to be careful. Who in the Luo family didn't know about little Wang Shi's matter? Most likely many relatives also knew. Only then did the husband and wife realize it. They hurriedly asked someone to fetch water to wash their faces. After that, they wouldn't be able to put on makeup for a long time. Originally, every time Sun Yijia came back from going out, she would wash her face immediately. But today she was worried about Jingwan and was anxious, so she forgot to do it. Grandmother, I'll go too. Jingwan followed. Madame Luo glanced at her. Change your clothes and come back. Although these words were very normal, Jingwan couldn't help but blush. She felt uncomfortable that everything was seen through. Moreover, third uncle was seriously injured and she didn't know if he could survive. Her clothes were indeed a little delicate. Grandmother, go ahead first. I'll come after I change my clothes. Madame Luo nodded and left with her people. Jingbo, let's go and take a look too? After Sun Yijia finished washing her face, she whispered to him. Luo Jingbo frowned subconsciously. It's probably a busy time over there. We won't be able to see third uncle. Also, what if you get hurt? I guess the younger generation of each branch hasn't received the news yet. Let's wait. If something happens, grandmother will probably send someone to inform us. Also, if little sister wants to go, she has always been reliable. Even if grandmother forgets, she definitely won't. Sun Yijia thought about it and agreed. The child in her belly was the most important thing now. Jingwan changed her clothes and came out of the room. She was dressed plainly, but it didn't affect her temperament at all. Luo Jingbo reminded her twice. Jingwan nodded. Don't worry. Sister-in-law, just take care of yourself and don't worry about anything else. When Jingwan arrived at the third branch, eldest Aunt Madame Wang, fourth Aunt Madame Wu, and her mother were all there. As for the other women, they must be third uncle's concubines. This number was really large. The other three brothers probably only had this many concubines, right? Grandfather might not like third uncle, but in terms of teaching, there shouldn't be too much of a difference. But why was the final result like this? Was it really because of their own problems? These women cried endlessly, but with grandmother outside, they didn't dare to cry too loudly. They only sobbed softly. She wondered if these women were really sad or worried about their future. If Luo Rongping died, the Luo family wouldn't ignore them. But if they didn't have children, they would be in danger. Among these people, there were no good concubines or noble concubines. If Madame Lu was ruthless, she could sell them all. Therefore, they didn't want Luo Rongping to die the most. That's right, they just didn't want him to die. Anyway, when he was well, they were also neglected and paralyzed in bed. Jingwan didn't see concubine Huan, who made third uncle and third aunt completely fall out with each other. Concubine Huan was probably serving in the room. She was also pregnant now, so she wasn't afraid of accidentally bumping into her. Speaking of which, these women's clothes were really very ordinary. To be honest, Jingwan felt that they couldn't even compare to the maids by her side. Compared to the other branches, the third branch was indeed a lot poorer, but it shouldn't be to this extent, right? Was it because Madame Lu embezzled, or they really didn't have the money to support them? Maybe it was both. In the Luo family, each man's concubines were only given to 3 people. If there were more, they would raise them themselves. Luo Rongping obviously didn't have the money to raise them, but he raised so many of them. After a while, he threw them aside and didn't care about them. What was going on? It was no wonder that Madame Lu was so ruthless to them. As for why she didn't sell them, not only did it cost money to raise them, but it also made people uncomfortable. Perhaps, as the saying goes, if the old doesn't go, the new won't come. Madame Lu probably wanted Luo Rongping to see. There was already a pile of them in the room. How to raise them? In the beginning, he had not been able to take out anything decent to please the beauty. Based on his character of wanting to save face and putting up a false front, he would probably be too embarrassed to bring anything into the room. As for asking him to sell it himself, don't joke around. This kind of losing face. If he gave them away, he could still make friends with them, but he would probably be beaten half to death by Luo Peishan. Seeing Jing when Madame Zhang hurriedly came up, Wan, I just heard that the doctor came from your place. Are you feeling unwell? Why didn't you tell me? Mother, I'm fine. I probably used some ice last night. The doctor has already seen me. I don't need to take any medicine. I was going to tell you, but I didn't have time. But because of her son's trivial matter, she did not care about her husband. Mother. Her lips trembled. She did not know how to speak. Do you think I'll let my grandson suffer a loss? Mother, I didn't mean that. Then I'll have to trouble you. She reluctantly turned back. When Luo Xiaoba was brought back, other than his eyes being a little red, there was no other problem. Madame Luo, when I was changing 8th young master's clothes, I saw that 8th young master's hands and knees were bruised. This servant took the initiative to ask. 8th young master said that his servant went to the toilet. He was about to come back to find 3rd madam, but he was suddenly pushed and fell to the ground. Not only was he bruised, but he was also pressed down on the ground. That servant told him that 3rd young master is gone, and 3rd madam is not liked by you. In the future he will be a pitiful worm in the Luo family. Madame Luo stroked her sleeves. He really has guts. It was not a heavy sentence, but even Madame Wang, who had been in charge of the family for many years, could not help but tense up when she heard it. Madame Luo waved at Luo Xiaoba. Xiaoba, come here. Grandmother. Luo Xiaoba went over. Is my father really gone? Do you really not like me anymore? Don't listen to those people's nonsense. Your father was accidentally injured. Nothing will happen. Our Xiaoba has always been an obedient child. How can grandmother not like him? Tell grandmother who was the person who said these words to you and pushed you. Madame Lu usually looked fierce, but now she couldn't even manage her own courtyard? Grandmother, I don't know. I was pushed from behind. It seemed to be a maid in a green dress. Except for the people in this room, gather all the servants of the 3rd branch. Eldest daughter-in-law, you deal with this matter. If there is anything wrong, don't be polite. They will all be sold as guilty slaves. As mother. First aunt, I have a small suggestion. I don't know if I can say it. Jingwan stopped Madame Wang. What can't you say? Just say it. 3rd young lady has always been smart. Maybe you can quickly find the real culprit. First aunt, you flatter me. Separate everyone and find more people. At the same time, ask them what they have done, who they have seen, and even what they have said during this period of time. Record them one by one. Madame Wang immediately understood after Jingwan said this. Her eyes lit up. 3rd young lady, this is a good idea. After comparing them one by one, it will be clear at a glance who is the culprit. We can even extend the time. Those who are alone will also know if they are doing what they were supposed to do. Jingwan nodded. First aunt, you are very thoughtful. 3rd young lady, don't flatter me. Then they just had to wait for the results. However, the imperial physician had not arrived and the situation inside was getting worse. Obviously, what happened to Luo Xiaoba had come to an end. Wang Shi just whispered to Madame Luo. Jingwan naturally would not inquire about Wang Shi's concealment. However, in the Luo family, there was probably no one else but concubine Huan who would have bad intentions towards Luo Xiaoba. Whether today's matter had something to do with her or not, in short, the people around Luo Xiaoba who were bribed by her should have been removed. However, concubine Huan could compete with Madame Lu because she still relied on Luo Rongping. It didn't make sense for her to let people attack Luo Xiaoba at this juncture. She was still so despicable. Wasn't her original intention to let Luo Xiaoba get close to her and alienate Madame Lu, and then secretly destroy Luo Xiaoba's body? Maybe she was just bribed by her to make her own decision? After this incident, Madame Lu could be more alert. However, without Luo Rongping to rely on, it should not be difficult for Madame Lu to deal with concubine Huan, right? The other members of the Luo family came back one after another. Luo Peishan, on the other hand, came back later than usual. When he went to the 3rd branch, there was only old Madame Luo, his other 3 sons, and Luo Jingming. How is the situation? The imperial physician said that his life should be saved, but I'm afraid that he will have to lie in bed for the rest of his life. The exact situation will be seen tomorrow morning. Tonight maybe. I left the two imperial physicians in the residence. Luo Peishan nodded and then looked at Luo Jingming. This grandson was too quiet at this time. Go back and rest. Come back tomorrow. Grandfather. Okay, there's no need to say anything more. I've already asked someone to apply for leave for you at the Imperial College. Thank you, grandfather. Go back. Yes, I'll take my leave. After Luo Jingming left, Luo Peishan's eldest son, Luo Rongwen, immediately asked, Father, what exactly happened to third brother? That's right, they did not believe that this was really an accident. Luo Peishan glanced at them. There's no value in being alive. There's only value in being dead. There was even a hint of ruthlessness in his words. This meant that Luo Rongping was still alive and this matter was an accident. Only when he was dead would they investigate to the end. Father, why did this happen? Luo Rongyen frowned in confusion. He despised this third brother of his who was snobbish, but he was still his own brother. Why did he not say anything when an outsider bullied him? Why? Because there's balance. Even His Majesty is happy to see this kind of balance. Prince Kang's family has Jingguo's wife, but because her face was disfigured and she's only Prince Kang's cousin, the value of the marriage alliance weakened. As for Prince Rui, his fourth daughter became his concubine. She's only a concubine after all, so there's only so much value. The imbalance before was because of third brother's involvement. Now that third brother is like this, is it completely balanced? Luo Peishan sneered. I told him long ago not to get involved in this kind of thing, but he insisted on doing it his own way. He's extravagant in his extravagant hopes for riches and honor. He doesn't even know if he has the ability and the fate to do so. Heaven's sins can be forgiven, but the sins brought on by oneself are the hardest to bear. Then who did it? Luo Rongwei asked. Previously he stuck with Prince Kong. Later he wanted to use his daughter to achieve meteoric success with Prince Rui. Who do you think did it? He's a fence-sitter. Does he think that others don't know? Then it's Prince Kong? Luo Rongwei scratched his head. Idiot. Luo Peishan scolded. Chapter 164. It's not wrong to say that Prince Kong did this. After all, when the third son had an accident, there were people from Prince Kang's faction around. Even if it's not him, all the evidence will point to him. So what he did was not wrong, and whether it was an accident or not, it doesn't matter. In the end, the Luo family is just a chess piece for those people. Luo Peishan said helplessly. In fact, Luo Peishan had another guess in this matter. Since a certain king of hell got involved, he always felt that there was his shadow everywhere. He was like a ghost, lingering and not dispersing. Many things went smoothly, but sometimes he felt even more exhausted. If this continued, he was even worried that he would lose 10 years of his life. He had no one to complain about this kind of anxiety, because as the only person he could talk to, his old wife had long been siding with an outsider, who let her dear grandchild be her treasure. If the living king of hell could protect her treasure, then it was a good thing. Thinking like this, Luo Peishan unconsciously glanced at his old wife. She lowered her eyebrows and narrowed her eyes to drink tea, as if she didn't hear their conversation at all. Also, in this kind of thing she always only listened and didn't talk. Concubine Huan, what are you doing here? Mrs. Lu's voice came from behind. Luo Peishan and the others looked at each other. Since they dared to talk about this matter here, naturally they were not afraid of being heard by the women of the third branch. Or Luo Peishan was deliberately doing it. Regarding the matter of Luo Jingying, after all, she was Mrs. Lu's daughter. As a mother, it was impossible for her not to know anything about how to arrange her. It just so happened that there were some things to let her know a little more clearly. Let her know that she could only rely on the Luo family now. If she was restless all day long and always thought about some nonsense, then don't blame the Luo family for not tolerating her. But why did concubine Huan appear again? This was the main room of the third branch. Why was there a concubine here at this time? Come out. Old Madame Luo said lightly. She didn't know that inside, Madame Lu was staring at concubine Huan with a cold smile. After hearing what she shouldn't have heard, she wanted to run away. She didn't even ask if she agreed. This slut had relied on that damn thing's favor to climb over her head time and time again. What was even more hateful was that she had dared to stretch her hand over her son's head. Now that that damned thing couldn't climb up and she had caught such a good opportunity, if she didn't take revenge now, when would she? Concubine Huan's eyes were hazy. Mrs. Lu asked her to bring out the water. She also knew that she couldn't argue with her at this critical juncture. She could only wait for San Yi to wake up. As long as San Yi said that he couldn't leave her and wanted her to serve him, she could protect herself. As long as she gave birth to a child, whether it was a boy or a girl, she could think of a way to settle down. With the eldest son of the third branch as an example, she wouldn't stupidly kill herself. It should be possible to let Lei Oi take care of her. If it was a girl, then they could only blame that they didn't have the fate of mother and daughter. She thought that Mrs. Lu just wanted to take the opportunity to torment her, so she was very obedient. She didn't expect that there was such a big trap waiting for her. She knew that she was not easy to deal with, but she still underestimated her. Mrs. Lu didn't leave just now. Perhaps she knew that Lei Oi was coming, but she didn't know. He could set a trap. It didn't matter if it succeeded or not. But obviously not only did it succeed, it was also fatal. When they heard old Madame Luo's summons, they tidied up their clothes and came out one after another. Because there were several men, either eunuchs or uncles, with their heads slightly lowered, their eyes fell on the ground. She greeted him politely. "Did you hear what we said before? What do you want to say?" Luo Peishan went straight to the point. Although Mrs. Lu didn't hear as much as concubine Huan, Luo Peishan's last few words were almost enough. Because of Luo Jingying, she had already sobered up a lot. It was simply a dream to try to restore her family. Her mother had died early and her father had also passed away. Now her elder brother was in charge of the Lu family, but he was just a loser. Although he had the title of a count, he was idle all day long and didn't work. He didn't have much wealth to begin with, so naturally he lost it even faster. From time to time he would come to her place to ask for money. Even if the emperor's grace was vast and mighty and he was promoted, could he support it? Would the Luo family think highly of him? Would her status in the Luo family be raised because of this? The answer was actually very obvious: no. The Luo family was a scholarly family and a family of etiquette. Her father-in-law and mother-in-law were not snobbish people. When you were down, they would not hit you when you were down, and when you were rich, they would not covet your slightest bit. She should have seen this fact clearly a long time ago, but she was unwilling. But now what could she do even if she was unwilling? Everything was just a delusion. If she really dared to do anything else and make the Luo family abandon her, she would really have no way to live. She had once threatened Luo Rongping by beating the drum. She wasn't tired of living yet. Mrs. Lu directly knelt down. "Father, mother, in the past, this daughter-in-law was insensible and caused you a lot of trouble. In the future, this daughter-in-law will live a good life and raise the children well. I will not ruin the Luo family's reputation." Did she really think it through? It seemed that this person really knew how to reflect on herself in despair. However, Mrs. Lu's words didn't seem to have anything to do with her husband. It could be seen that until now her heart was still filled with resentment. In fact, from Mrs. Lu's point of view, it was natural for her to feel resentment. "Whether you really think so or it's just a temporary measure, this is your last chance," old Madame Luo said. Mrs. Lu's body trembled slightly, and there was a trace of joy in her heart. Concubine Huan also hurriedly knelt down and expressed her position. "Master, old madam, this concubine is willing to take care of third master for the rest of my life. If something happens to third master, please wait for this concubine to give birth to a child. Then this concubine is willing to be buried with third master." If Luo Rongping heard this, he would probably be very moved. You might even hug each other and have a touching scene of life and death parting. Tears would fall like rain and he would be heartbroken. Unfortunately, the men present were far from being as protective of the fairer sex as Luo Rongping. Moreover, their brother's concubine had nothing to do with them, so they wouldn't even look at her. Moreover, that's your man. Isn't it right for you to do that? And for old Madame Luo, concubine Huan's little tricks were simply not enough. She looked at her meaningfully, then looked at Mrs. Lu, who had lowered her eyes. "Third daughter-in-law, she is a member of your third branch. You are the mistress of the third branch. Naturally, you should deal with this matter. However, there are some things that should be left to rot in your stomach. If you say it out loud, it won't be good for anyone." "Yes, this daughter-in-law understands," Mrs. Lu respectfully responded. "In that case, keep an eye on third master tonight. If there's anything, immediately report to us." Luo Peishan gave his final instructions, then got up and left. Old Madame Luo followed closely behind, followed by the other three masters. Mrs. Lu stood up and glanced at concubine Huan, who was still kneeling upright. "Someone come?" The maidservant guarding outside immediately came in. "Madam, send someone to Concubine Juan's courtyard and bring her daily change of clothes. Concubine Juan will serve third master day and night. In the future, Concubine Juan will live in the back room of the main house." In order to protect herself, this bitch would make any choice. Mrs. Lu would naturally fulfill her wish. Serving people had never been an easy job, especially a person who was fine one moment and paralyzed the next. Her temperament would inevitably change greatly. This kind of person would probably only prove that she still existed and was superior to others by torturing others. Who else could be more suitable for this task than Concubine Juan? Mrs. Lu bent down slightly and patted Concubine Juan's mother. "Third master likes you so much, and he also trusts you very much. In the future you must serve him well. Don't let down his feelings for you." "Madam, don't worry. This concubine will definitely serve third master well," Concubine Juan said. It was almost impossible to detect any difference from her tone. Mrs. Lu nodded. "That's good." Mrs. Lu was actually looking forward to it. She wanted to see how long this bitch could last. She would not let anyone help her. Eating, drinking, going to the toilet, everything would be taken care of by this bitch. Moreover, Luo Rongping was the third master of the Ministry of Personnel. Even if he was paralyzed, Mrs. Lu could not abuse him. Therefore, once he felt uncomfortable, it must be because this bitch did not serve him well. He. When Concubine Juan heard Mrs. Lu's laughter, she could not help but feel a chill in her heart. An eyesore of a concubine without a man to rely on, she could only be kneaded and squashed by the mistress. He could not resist. Don't say that there were so many people around her before. When she worked for her, those people were the best at taking advantage of the situation. Moreover, she belonged to a lowly concubine. To put it bluntly, she was the property of the master and mistress. Now that the master was gone, she was firmly controlled by the mistress. Didn't she hear Mrs. Lu say that she would only pack a few clothes for her? In other words, everything else no longer belonged to her. "You can get close to my son under my nose and bribe the people around him. Originally, I thought that you were capable. However, I have been waiting for you to do something stupid. But in fact, you don't have that ability. You schemed against the third young lady and then framed me. You have always wanted to do this, right? It's a pity that you can't even get close to that girl. In this backyard, it's possible for me to scheme against anyone. There are only two people that I won't directly reach out to. One is the old madam and the other is our third young lady. Touching the third young lady's hair is more serious than scratching the old madam's body. In the whole mansion, only my stupid daughter insisted on going up to find trouble. I have already told her not to directly confront her. However, she is also a young lady in the mansion. The old madam only punished her. If it were you or me, the old madam will definitely skin us alive. Do you believe it or not?" The more Mrs. Lu said, the more she felt that it was reasonable. Before, she realized that she could not directly attack that girl Luo Jingwan, but she had never been so clear-headed. She also had to bear a large part of the responsibility for her daughter's current situation. Once she started to be clear-headed, she would be completely clear-headed. But now she could not take care of her daughter. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.